Test, does that work? Can you hear me? Okay. We're good, we're live, all right. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. Let's go ahead and start out with roll call, please.
Senator Beitman. Senator Cooper. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Wasserberger. Representative Baer.
Here.
Representative Burkhart.
Here.
Representative Duncan.
She's going to be attending by Zoom, so she's excused until she comes on.
Representative Ayer. Representative Gray.
Here.
Representative Heiner.
Here.
Representative Sherwood. Representative Western. Co-Chairman Anderson.
Here.
Chairman Greer.
Here. All right, well, good morning. We have a relatively light schedule today. I think we'll get some good updates, a couple bills to consider, and we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. So first item up on our list will be an update from Rocky Mountain Power, and so they'll come forward. We got to thank all familiar faces, but yeah, please state your name, who you're representing, address the chair. Don't make me cranky my last day, okay?
Would never dream of it, Mr. Chairman.
Don't make it more.
Good morning, Mr. Chairs and members of the committee. My name is Tom Carter. I'm the Government Affairs Director for Pacific Corp Rocky Mountain Power. It's good to be here in Casper this morning. With me is Rick Kaysen, who is also represents Rocky Mountain Power up here. A few weeks ago, about a little more than 2 weeks ago, we provided a letter at the request of LSO answering some questions that were posed to us at the last committee hearing. I'm happy to give you a high-level response to that. I know you've all had that in your packet. Happy to review kind of all the answers at the discretion of the chairs.
Yeah, why don't, Mr. Carter, why don't we just go ahead and walk down through some of those issues
Absolutely.
we had discussed. They're important lingering issues for the state and some that are very near and dear to all of us on this committee.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Well, the first question we were asked is, you'd like to see a map of the transmission lines that compromise the Energy Gateway West project. We've provided that map as attachment A. You can see that is, will run throughout the west. It's about 416 total miles, but 124 of those miles will be here in Wyoming. We anticipate a little more than 1,300 construction jobs, and will be completed in about 2 years. We're excited about what that means for power generation and power transmission. And we love talking about generation, but transmission is the highway that makes it go. I always say that transmission is the sexy part of electricity, so we're excited about what that means. We did break ground on that project the day that we were here last, so we're excited about what that means.
He said it has about a 2-year completion.
Yeah,
That's what you're looking
we anticipate that in 2024. The amount of electricity generated in Wyoming, that's we give you a full breakdown of that in attachment B. Our coal generation, or sorry, our thermal generation is about 8.25 megawatts, 8.25 million megawatts. Of that, to answer your question, about 13.8% stays in the state of Wyoming, and then 86% of that goes out of state. Wyoming has a great, rich history of being an energy exporter. We also have our wind-owned generation is 5.03 million megawatts. Also, that same number, 13% stays, and 86% goes. The next question was in regard to, sorry.
Committee, do you have any questions on any of that? So I guess one thing when, and I know we'll be pulling off a couple of coal units, but with the Kemmer project, hopefully getting online in about 7 years, is what, to the extent you can discuss it publicly, what excess capacity do you have available for additional generation in Wyoming?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you know, we are a full system, right? So it's not just Wyoming generation, it's throughout the Rocky Mountain West, the entire West as we generate. At this point, we are continuing to build additional generation. We want to build as much generation as possible. Through our IRP process, we will be looking at what new needs will come to place. I'll talk about this later on, what our carbon capture project is going to look like as we go into market with our RFP here in about a week. And then we'll have an announcement later today about additional generation projects that I can't get into until we make that public in the day. So we're always constantly looking at ways to ensure that we have an appropriate amount, as much generation as we possibly can.
So, Mr. Carter, as we look into, let's just say, a 10-year time frame, which is overnight in your industry for construction, I understand, but as we look at the overall demand or need for electricity as attitudes or technology changes, what do you see in terms of being able to supply that to the other parts of your service area?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mr. Chair. I think what I see and really will go in line as we're currently writing our 2023 integrated resource plan is we can't move faster than technology will allow. And so while we do have these closure dates that are sitting out there, we're working within new technologies, like I mentioned, the CCUS, as well as other opportunities to make it happen. You and I have spoken about this earlier this morning, that oftentimes there are pressures to move faster than technology allows. And so as we look at storage, battery, wind, other opportunities, or kind of what the needs may be for our service territory, I'm interested and encouraged to see what our planning team will be putting together for 2023. But as far as finding ways to ensure that we're using the assets we have, that our full life of these current generation assets are achieved, I think we're on target.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Senator Byman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to get an answer out of them for you. Today, as of right now, what is our excess capacity? Are we at capacity, or do we have some wiggle room?
So we build towards full capacity, right? So there are a day like today where we probably won't be using all of our excess generation because, it's cold, so people aren't running their air conditioning. They're not using that. We will probably have capacity on our system, but you build towards what our full capacity is. This last summer, we reached capacity on our full system. We peaked, as they say, in mid-September. So we can't just say that there is excess capacity on the system because there's never necessarily excess capacity. You have to be able to, on days when it's hot, or days when we need our full list of megawatts, you can have low megawatt days, you're going to have full megawatt days. And so, yes, there are days where we're not at full capacity, but we do use all our electricity when we need it.
Follow up.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
So if a bunch of people ran out this weekend and bought electric vehicles and then Monday night plugged them in at 8 o'clock, would our grid be able to handle thousands of electric vehicles, or are we going to be hurting?
That's a great question. I do not believe so.
Thank you.
Which is the reason for building more transmission.
Okay, go ahead, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Carter, there's a move to expand Southwest Power Pool through the Northern Rocky Mountains up into the Pacific Northwest. So where does Rocky Mountain Power stand with that proposal? And what would it mean to Wyoming, especially considering the green energy mandates that they have in Oregon, Washington, California?
Yeah, that's a great question. Mr. Chair, we are looking at all possibilities and opportunities as it relates to different markets, right? So Southwest Power Pool is one. there are lots of conversations around different regional transmission organizations or transmission organizations, the RTOs, and what would work best for our markets. Whether it's day ahead or working around the West. Our goal is to make sure we provide affordable and reliable and safe power for all of our customers. And so I think, from what I understand, our planning team, who are looking they're looking at every available opportunity to ensure that our market is the best market, so that we can provide that always-on power. I recognize that within our own system, within our own Pacific Corp system, there are states that have these mandates, and there are states that don't, that believe that the market should drive the generation, that we should work towards using time transmission and technology to make these determinations. So as we determine which is the best market for our system, we will keep those things in mind.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Go ahead.
So, Mr. Carter, back to my question. So what's the benefit to Wyoming? What do we get out of this?
Southwest Power Pool, or staying in and out, or
In an RTO, Southwest Power Pool being one, because they've already produced a map showing the expansion and the request from other states to do that.
yeah, I mean,
Benefit to this state?
but so also, I keep saying these are great questions because they are.
Well, not all of Representative Burkhart's questions are great.
Most of them are fantastic.
I think the goal of an RTO, and I'm not an expert in RTOs, but I think the goal of the RTO is to ensure that there is an ability to create as much transmission as possible at the lowest possible cost, or that's one of the goals. I think there are other goals stated by other states on moving some outside political forces onto states like Utah, Wyoming, Idaho. I think the way we are going to look at an RTO is to ensure that our ability to produce affordable and reliable power also continue to build as much transmission as possible won't be hampered. So what's the benefit for our Wyoming? I don't know. I can't speak to the benefit to Wyoming. I think we are not going to, as we look at potentially joining an RTO, I think our goal will be to ensure that we won't move away from our longstanding 100-year partnership with Wyoming on those things. I do see Randall Luthi in the back of the room. He might be able to talk about what he wants to see out of an RTO. Throw him under the bus.
No, we'd rather throw you under the bus.
Appreciate it, yeah.
So, okay, Representative Hunter.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Representative. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carter, I've had a chance to review your published avoided costs for the next number of years. It gives me a kind of an indication what you foresee the future being for your costs of generation and providing power. There's a hinge point, a definite hinge point in the year 2030, and those avoided costs become exponential, doubling and tripling in the cost. Does that have any relation to closing our thermal power plants that causes our power to go up exponentially like that in the forward years?
I'll be honest with you, Mr. Chair. I don't know. I'll have to look at that and get an answer back to you.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question, but it's not a great question.
Okay.
This map shows a line from somewhere in Utah to Red Butte. Looks like it's all standalone, but I'm assuming that's all connected to the grid as are all the others. That just isn't connected to the south, Gateway South, I guess, is all.
Yeah, it's connected through a different line, different power generation.
I told you it wasn't a great question.
Mr. Carter, we appreciate Rocky Mountain Power taking the time to go through the questions that we had asked. Appreciate you coming here and answering our questions. And, I'll just say you understand the frustration of most of this committee, most of the people of the state of Wyoming, right? Rocky Mountain Power is a big big player in our state, always been a big, you know, and so our underlying irritation, and this was where these questions come from, really is, you know, the simple fact that we see other states with mandates that are dictating actions that you really don't have any choice but to follow, but have really detrimental consequences to our state. And so that's where our agitation comes from. And I appreciate you coming in and trying your best to answer the great questions and the regular questions.
Well, Mr. Chair, I appreciate that. As you know, prior to this job, I was the energy advisor to Governor Cox, and I'd get these questions a lot. I remember when Oregon passed their decarbonization by date, and I called my counterpart up there and I said, "What's your plan to get there?" They said, "Well, we don't have a plan." And then we're just throwing a date against the wall to make it happen. And what I appreciate about what we're trying to do at Rocky Mountain, and so I said to them in my previous role, like, well, that's no plan at all. That's just guesswork. We go through at Rocky Mountain Power, we go through an integrated resource plan. We try and make it work to ensure we maintain our reliability of power. As you know, those plans are updated every 2 years. Nothing is necessarily set in stone. It's where our resources are now, where we hope they will be in 10, 15, 20 years. I recognize the frustration, and we're here. We continue to come. We continue to be here because we want to be an ongoing partner. We've been here for 100 years. We plan to be here for 100 more, if not longer. And so anything I can do to continue to both answer and or dodge your questions, I will do.
You're pretty adept at dodging us. Mr. Kaysen, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, committee members, my name is Rick Kaysen. Before we get too far further into the questions that was posed by the committee, two things, if I may. Mr. Chairman, you asked about the coal-fired plants going offline and what's the plans type thing. One of the things that Rocky Mountain Power is also looking at, and I think we've talked about this before, and that's transitioning some of these units possibly to natural gas and trying to extend the life of these units, not necessarily each power plant, because there are a number of units at the power plants where they can extend that life economically and be viable for our customers as well, for that reliability that we always like to talk about as well. So we're looking at different types of transitions. It's just not saying they're going offline at a certain particular date. Those are planned dates, but again, subject to change. And if I may, to Senator Beitman's question with regards to capacity and if you plug in the electric vehicles and all that type thing, within the systems, and this is not just Rocky Mountain Power, all electric utilities participate in this, they do have planned reserves within their system. For example, if a unit we'll go in our own backyard right here, at Dave Johnson's went offline, we need that backup power of those reserves or go to the market to make sure that we're meeting our customers' needs. So within the planning, there are planned reserves on a percentage basis. And I don't know if that helps answer the question or not, but there are efforts to make sure that we do meet those customer needs. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. That was my question I had on number 5 there. The answer was that, and convert existing generating resources rather than retire or liquidate assets. And I was thinking natural gas, but maybe we could convert to hydrogen also. Is that open still, or would the only thing we do is natural gas? And what would be the reason to keep those open with natural gas as opposed to coal? Is it easier to comply? Is that some of the reasons?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's great. It's also great.
Great question.
It's an old political tool of buying time by saying words first before answering your question. As we mentioned in the answer to 5, hydrogen, of course, is on the table. We are interested in all of the above and are committed to the all of the above strategy that this state has. Natural gas, hydrogen, all fuel types continue to be on the table. But one of the things that we did want to talk about today is around this compliance issue. We've mentioned at times this new EPA proposed rule, the ozone transport rule, or OTR, sometimes known as good neighbor. We don't like calling it a good neighbor rule because it's actually not. about that. What that rule says is that emissions from Wyoming and Utah, ozone emissions or precursors to ozone emissions coming out of our coal plants are causing air quality sensors in Denver to surpass their limited value. And thus, the EPA is saying to Wyoming and Utah that because of that, you need to find a way to reduce your precursors to ozone, your NOx emissions. You have two ways to do that. You can put an SCR on, or you can close. And the compliance date is 2026. And so, or you can transition your fuel base as well. We've been working very closely with Governor Gordon's team because one, we believe the methodology is bad. And two, we recognize that to comply within that timeline is impossible. Now, luckily, we already have SCR on Bridger, but we don't on our other units, our other coal units. And putting SCR is not only very expensive, but based on our analysis, we see that there are about 10 units that we'd have to put SCR on amongst our system. And there's enough supply chain and workforce to do one. And so that would accelerate closure forced upon us by the EPA and not enough time to build new generation units. So we're having some trouble. We recognize where the Wyoming DEQ has put in some very strong comments. We've put in some very strong comments. Utah DEQ has also put in some very strong comments, and we're in the process of having some really good well, I wouldn't say good. We're having some conversations with the EPA now. We anticipate that rule to come final end of this year, beginning of next. We're not sure what it'll say. We're hopeful that they will fix their methodology. We're hopeful that they might change their timeline. But we have, one thing that we keep saying is we have a plan. We have a plan to continue to provide reliable energy throughout the West. What the EPA is saying to us is we don't care about your plan. We just want you to close because of one sensor in Denver. So when we look at fuel transitions, hydrogen, natural gas, all of those things, it has to do with some of the external Washington, D.C. pressures that are being pushed upon us.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks. Part of the original question was related to hydrogen as an alternative energy source, and I just wanted to check in on this. I don't see how you would use hydrogen as a source to replace natural gas or coal. I see where there's good business model around producing hydrogen for other purposes and uses. But the suggestion or the implication with everything on the table is that you would potentially use hydrogen as a source. Can you walk us through what Rocky Mountain Power or Pacific Corp is considering with regard to sourcing hydrogen and then using that as a fuel source in a reactor?
So what I know at this point is that hydrogen is listed as one of the fuels we're looking at in our current IRP. That's all I can.
Can you follow up then?
Yeah,
I'd
happily.
like more detail. It makes no sense to me in the context of any Western energy production. So I'd be very curious to see how Rocky and Pacific Corp are looking at that as a source of energy, not just as a commodity for temporary production and storage.
Happily.
All right, we'll roll through. I appreciate you being our warm-up to get our brains working.
That's
right.
my pleasure.
Huh? It's like the pre-fight.
Absolutely. Yeah, I figure, we're the opening act and Bon Jovi will follow us, and we've got something good for you.
All right. Let's talk about sequestration.
Yeah, let's
and
talk about
carbon
that.
capture.
So look, so in compliance with state law as well as a settlement agreement on regional haze, we will be releasing our RFP. We need to release RFP by the end of the year. RFP for Dave Johnson's Unit 4 and Jim Bridger's Unit 3. So it'll be two different RFPs. They will be released. We are confident that it's on track to be released on Tuesday. We were hoping to release them last week, but because of this OTR issue and SCR, we pushed it back. We pushed it back until November 1st, still 2 months ahead of the statutory deadline. The goal there is, the objective of the carbon capture RFP is not only to comply with HB 200 and additional regulations, but it's also we want to be able to demonstrate that CCUS can work and will be technically and economically feasible. And we will then review those into February, or the bidders will have till February to apply. We're cutting our review process short. We hope to be able to let organizations and companies know that they have the chance to move forward by early springtime. What I'll tell you this is that since we last met, the passage of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, that does not reduce inflation at all, but it's fun to name stuff, does allow for more time for tax credits for CCUS, which has given CCUS a bit of a leg up and is quite exciting for this process. It also creates a very competitive market, not just for Wyoming, but throughout the West. And so what we believe is that because of HB 200, we have a very competitive case to be made about our units here in Wyoming. And as we write this RFP, as we look at what organizations can be doing, we're confident we've got some pretty big players that are looking to put down stakes and participate in our RFP. And so we're excited to get that out to the market. We're also excited to see, based on those companies that have expressed interest, what will come back to us, and then hopefully expand the life of some of these units.
Yep, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious about tentative or preliminary numbers on projected budget for the beginning of the project, how that ends up, and part of this is statutory, how that ends up getting paid for, how that affects the ratepayer. Can you walk us through perhaps those early anticipated budget figures as the RFP is going out? I assume some projection was made, and then the expected implications for ratepayers over the coming years.
Yeah, I have to be, Senator, Mr. Chair.
You're right.
I want to be careful as to not get too far out in front of what we anticipate from the RFP, because we recognize that everybody will be different, every opportunity will be different, and what we do believe is that this will be expensive, and how we work, sorry, let me gather my thoughts. Our goal will be to ensure that those providing application through the RFP are capitalized, and that they have resources available to be financially viable within this process. I cannot speak today on how any additional costs that we incur will be passed along. I don't want to get ahead of any conversations that might be made within our system or to our regulators. But I do know that being fully capitalized is something that will be important within the RFP. And I'm happy to come back to you with those answers at a future date.
Mr. Chairman, well, I think it's important for us to hear real numbers, honestly. When we just hear the words "it's expensive," it becomes vague and nebulous, and we can all assign a value to that. And then we think that somehow by saying that it's going to be capitalized, that means that it's going to be externally paid for. I think one of the concerns of this project and process along the way is not a concern with CCUS. I think everybody here likes CCUS. It's the idea of how does this particular approach to implementing CCUS affect the ratepayers and affect our utility structure in the state. And one of the challenges has been exactly this. I would really like to know the numbers that go along with it. And I guess what we probably need then is the RFP responses and then a report back from that. So what I'll ask is, once we see that, I'd appreciate it on the next presentation, we have very specific numbers and specific implications to ratepayers associated with those numbers as we're looking at RFP responses. Because this is a first of its kind, this is a pretty big deal, and there have been significant concerns related to how this would affect ratepayers going forward with this project. So I understand that it doesn't look like that's available right now, but I think it's something that we should hear as a committee. Thank you.
Happy to provide those when they're available.
Yeah, one is I'm very pleased that we're not now saying we can't do our carbon capture, sequestration, utilization, because it'll kill the scare tactic. It'll make rates go up, that we're finding ways to make it happen. To me, that's a step forward with it. And I think what Senator Rothfuss is as we see the plans come together, we'll see projections and we'll get, they won't be specific numbers, but they'll be general numbers.
Yep.
So, and I just think it's important that this committee stay up on those types of things and be there to assist as necessary. So, yeah, Mr. Casey.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, to try to not answer Senator Rothfuss's question, but just kind of give an idea. Our analysis shows that on a per unit basis, and let's say if we out at the Dave Johnston unit, number 4 goes in. Each unit is about, for CCUS, is about $1 billion per unit, okay? So needless to say, that's a staggering amount of money. That's what some of the requests for proposal and analysis will provide in dealing with those that are responding to that is who's going to own it, who's going to operate it, all of those things will come out. And then, of course, as we know, at the end of the day, for a regulated utility, we'll be in front of the Public Service Commission to ferret out how that impact is going to be for the customer. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we do have it noted here and be responsive to your inquiry. And Mr. Chairman, if I also may add on to what Mr. Carter has said about the OTR and the RFP delay right there. One of the things we wanted to make sure is absolutely full compliance, not with only with state requirements, House Bill 200, but also with this OTR, and to make sure when the RFP is issued that then the responders also are in compliance with the OTR so that there's no back and forth and delaying the analysis. So try to make this as efficient as possible to get to decision-making time to make sure we have the RFP clear as far as what the responders' responsibilities are going to be as well. So I think that's another element, or that is another element why it was delayed a couple of weeks for issuance to the interested parties.
Chairman, quick follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So one thing I did want to follow up on, because I haven't heard any additional information. I know that this legislation was structured such that the state of Wyoming would effectively go it alone on the project and costs conceptually, but I don't think it means we have to. I think there is the opportunity to share in with other states if other states wanted to participate through the 6-state agreement. Have any other states expressed any interest in participating, or does it look like at this point we're still going it alone, where the state of Wyoming, one way or another, would be responsible for the full cost of CCUS?
That's at this point we have not had, from what I know, at this point we haven't had the conversation about shared costs. But what we amongst our whole system, we do need to, the benefit of this RFP process is that it coincides with our IRP, which allows us to then look amongst our 6 different regulators, not just Wyoming, but all 6 regulators, to say, okay, this is what we're seeing, this is the cost. Could these costs be spread throughout? So we have not, from what I know, we have not heard from our other regulators, but we have not presented it to our other regulators. But we do need to look and better understand what the project will look like before we can take it that far.
Yeah.
So is the plan then RFP, get some interest, understand kind of the scope of what solutions might be, and then you will take it to the other states to see if they have interest in sharing in cost and project? Or is it more consistent with kind of the original draft, which is largely in-house?
At this point, it's mostly consistent with the current draft of the bill, but as we work through our cost-based analysis, everything stays on the table.
Do you have a question, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, those kind of PSC questions that you'll be answering for the PSC, I'm sure. Your RFP, actually, somebody could bid that with putting up the money themselves for doing that carbon capture off your plant, and there would not be any rate issue at all, would there? And the other thing is, if they do take that off, can they send that CO2 anywhere to an EORI in Colorado or New Mexico or wherever, or do they have to sequester every bit of it?
We're asking within the RFP, and we're happy to send a copy of the RFP to every member of this committee once it goes live. And what we're asking is for people to come to us with a full solution, right? So a capture company comes with a sequestration company, get together, create your own bid. You'll see this within the RFP. And so if you are just a capture company, go out and find a place to sequester, utilize, come to us with a wholesale solution for what you want to do. If you're capitalized to make this happen, show us. If you have a place to store it, great. We want people with full solutions to come to us and show us what they want to do.
Follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, so would the RFP require that you bid on Dave Johnson number 4 and Bridger 3 and 4, or could you just bid on one location?
It'll be 2 different RFPs that allow you to bid on either one or both.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll, go ahead, sir. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Carter, just to make sure that I'm clear on this, you have 8,200 megawatts of thermal power capacity, and 86% of that is being exported. So about 7,000 megawatts is being exported of thermal generated power. And if we do carbon capture on these thermal generation power plants, you're expecting Wyoming to pay the total cost, or may pay the total cost to keep those running, and you're not sure whether the other states that are participating are benefiting from those thermal power generation, whether they will be willing to even support us in that Wyoming may foot this entire bill?
Mr. Chair, we have yet to have those conversations. What I'm saying is that we've got 5 other commissions that we'd have to have these conversations with and figure out a way to potentially spread the costs around. So what I'm saying is we have yet to have those conversations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're building a tremendous amount of transmission lines, big transmission lines to take this power out of state. If the state of Wyoming decided to put an export tax on electricity to cover our costs for all of this carbon capture, do you have the capability of quantifying how much electricity is crossing state lines through these big transmission lines?
Well, I mean, I think I quantified it in 83% of the power that we generate here goes to other places. Or your question is, can I tell you which state it goes to whom, which state? Is that the question?
My question is, do you have a meter that we could impose an export tax on as it crosses state lines? I don't care which state it goes to, but to recoup some of these costs of carbon capture that Wyoming is expected to put by themselves, we should somehow be able to pass that on to our exported energy, which is 86% of what we generate.
But especially to California.
Well, I mean, look, I appreciate your question, and I don't think I have a good answer for you. What I will tell you is there's a broader picture on the taxes that we provide to the state as well. I don't believe I can or will comment now on the ability that the state of Wyoming may or may not have to provide an export tax to power. I think that that's a much larger policy question that I cannot answer today. I think that's where I'll probably leave that.
Senator Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question goes back to the overall philosophical issue. Is the regulated utility model broken? Because is it even salvageable at this point? We, as the state of Wyoming, allow you guys to be in a monopoly. In exchange for that monopoly, we're supposed to get affordable, reliable energy, electricity that you guys supply to us. Now we have states like California dictating our energy policy, driving up our cost, eroding our reliability, and there's nothing we can do about it. And we just talked about taxing the export of electricity to those same people who are destroying our economy and ruining our reliability, and there's nothing we can do about it here in Wyoming. So is this system even salvageable at this point? Or should we go deregulated and let California build all the wind farms they want and let us do us and build coal-fired power plants so we'll be warm in the winter and be able to cool our homes in the summer?
Well, look, I'll let an upcoming witness, former Commissioner Tony Clark, talk about the positives and negatives of deregulation. And he's got a great perspective on that as he was with FERC. I will tell you this, Wyoming continues to maintain low-cost power. California does not. And that's because of good policy set here. And while we have to work within our 6-state system, their policy has not changed your rates. And yes, we have issues that we're working through. But I think that Mr. Clark will have something to say about the pros and cons of what we're seeing within the regulated utility.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Well, I think Representative Heiner hit the nail on the head when he brought up 2030. That's what I'm looking at.
Okay.
That's what my constituents are looking at. It's going to be a disaster. And my question is, what are you guys going to do about it? Or if you don't have an answer, it's up to us to come up with an answer, and quickly. So thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we appreciate it. We'll find out how important it is for grandma to have an air conditioner with green energy in about 5 to 6 years, won't we?
For sure.
Yeah,
Thank you for your time.
yeah, thank you. So I think Mr. Bush, Mr. Clark, I might want to do a quick, Mr. Fuller come up, do a quick flyover on the 2 draft bills, and then move into in Mr. Clark's presentation, and then comments from the other folks in the audience. So Brian, can you do that for us?
Yep, you bet, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So I will start with 23 LSO 50 Working Draft .5 Industrial Power Zones. This is 2-02 on the online meeting materials. This draft, in large part, is based on 2022 Senate File 71. And what this draft does is it would authorize the creation of industrial power zones on parcels of state land where power generation and consumption within that designated industrial power zone would be exempt from rate regulation and service territory requirements for electrical service. So the way the concept would work is either a board of county commissioners or a project proponent can approach a board of county commissioners, would propose to the Board of Land Commissioners that at least one state land parcel would be eligible to be an industrial power zone. That would go to the Board of Land Commissioners, which would then review that proposed power zone. There would be an analysis from the Public Service Commission on the potential impact that that industrial power zone would have on retail customers. And then the board can consider any other information in approving one of these zones. Once that zone is approved by the Board of Land Commissioners, then the provisions of Title 37, which concern public utilities, would not apply insofar as they deal with rate regulation and service territory requirements, so long as the power for that zone the customer who is in that zone receiving power receives and consumes the power entirely within the industrial power zone. The power use is only for commercial or industrial use, and that electricity is not replacing electrical service that existed before the approval of the industrial power zone. So, Mr. Chairman, that's in a nutshell 23 LSO 50.
Okay, Senator Rothfuss, do you have like a just quick flyover on your thought process here?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, again, we've talked about this before, but the idea is to have a very narrow solution that meets the interests of large-scale projects of virtually any type without having a comprehensive deregulation. We'll hear about the concerns of other states deregulating. This was a means of addressing that, where it would be new load in a special, highly scrutinized zone. And only under those conditions would you have the flexibility to provide power. You can think about this for hydrogen generation projects, for any petrochemical synthesis project, anything that requires a large amount of power, and where it would be favorable to have a business model where you had either a direct purchase agreement or even had a power producer within the zone that could then directly sell to consumers within the zone. By creating effectively an island of deregulation within the rest of the regulated utility structure, and then having the PSC scrutinize to see whether it would actually impact the regulated consumers. The idea is to create that isolation so that our regulated utility structure would be unaffected, but we would not have the challenges that we faced over the years where the one-size-fits-all monopoly has not always worked for particularly large power projects.
Okay. All right, then, Mr. Fuller, can you give us a quick walkthrough on 52?
Yep, so working draft 7, 23 LSO 52, direct electric service utility agreements. So this draft would allow any person to enter into a direct service agreement with any electric consumer in Wyoming for the provision of electric service to that consumer with some conditions. So that sale of electricity can't use any transmission infrastructure that's regulated by the Public Service Commission, or if the person selling the electricity is a public utility, it can use its existing transmission infrastructure so long as the agreement would account or charge separately for that consumer if the infrastructure was constructed partially or entirely with ratepayer funds, and the agreement doesn't result in any reduction in performance, reliability, or baseload capacity for the electric consumers. These agreements, once entered into, would then be similar to the previous bill, exempt from the rate requirement and service territory requirements for Title 37 for public utilities.
Okay, Mr. Fuller, do you want to just touch on your staff comments? Page 4 and 5.
Yep. So Mr. Chairman, the bill would require, if a electric utility is the entity entering into an agreement with the consumer, the bill draft would require the Public Service Commission to approve that agreement. So the staff comment on page 4 just notes potential additional considerations or requirements that the Public Service Commission would need to consider before or as a condition to approving those agreements. So additional costs to ratepayers, overbuilding, adverse impacts on current infrastructure.
Do you, is a comment in there because you think that would be advisable in statute, or, I mean, I think the PSC already would cover that, right?
Mr. Chairman, that's a fair point that they'd likely consider those under current statute, but it's just a consideration for the committee.
No, I'm just trying to get everybody focused in on this and woke up, so appreciate it. Okay.
And then, Mr. Chairman, the staff comment on page 5, the language in this bill is loosely based on current statutes concerning electric service agreements. And so the provisions there are provisions applying to those agreements but are not included in this draft. And so the question there would be, would the committee want this language, which concerns providing benefits to other customers without future or additional costs, revenue considerations as well as part of that agreement? The question there would be if the committee wants to include those as well.
Okay. All right. Senator Rothfuss, any quick comments on this? Or?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll just note, I had this drafted and worked with Mr. Fuller, and the draft does exactly what we discussed at previous meetings, and this was effectively the request of the power-consuming industry group that we've heard from in the past as a before-the-meter approach. Honestly, I do see problems with this approach, but I wanted to make sure that it was available for discussion because it was a topic of significant discussion and interest at the previous meeting. So if we're going to work this, this is something that should be in front of us. We'll probably hear some concerns raised about the idea of this allowing effectively poaching for existing load. And so you create either a consequence of potential unfair competition if you disallow one utility to have a reduced rate, excuse me, one consumer to have a reduced rate relative to another. And then to the extent that the regulated utility load is not particularly dynamic, this can lead to challenges and problems with costs and rate payments, particularly I think for our co-ops would struggle with some of the challenges here.
Yeah,
Those are all valid concerns.
I have to hold my nose as I read this, so yeah.
Mr. Chairman, they're all valid concerns, but it was exactly what was raised as a proposal, as an alternative to the industrial power zones. And I think it should be on the table. And honestly, it's the reason the industrial power zones is drafted the way it's drafted.
It's on the table for now.
It's on the table for now.
Okay, very good. All right, Mr. Bush, Mr. Clark, please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, David Bush, Black Hills Energy here in Wyoming. With me today is Tony Clark. Tony has met some of you last night and this morning. He served on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, for about 4.5 years. Prior to that, he was chairman of the North Dakota Public Service Commission and a North Dakota legislator. So he's got a broad experience with this system and electricity in general. And he appears today on behalf of EEI, Edison Electric Institute, which is kind of the national group for investor-owned utilities. So he's representing kind of all of us in the investor-owned utility world. And I think his experience with regulated markets and kind of a national perspective would be beneficial for the committee. So with that, I'll turn it over to him.
Okay, Mr. Clark, and folks, we have a handout. Are you going to sort of follow this as you go?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I'll be going through the slides. So.
Okay, please, Mr. Bush, introduce yourself so you can shorten that up if you want.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a particular pleasure to be before this committee in Wyoming today and listening to your discussions. It reminds me a lot of home in North Dakota because you're dealing with a lot of the same issues we do. In fact, I've often found a fair amount of kinship in policymakers between my home state and Wyoming because we deal with so many of the similar issues, being states largely dependent on the agriculture, farm, ranch, and energy economies. So it's a lot of the similar issues. We're further along on our mountain removal project than you all are, but so you've got a little bit of work to do there. But otherwise, lots of issues that are so similar. I feel like this issue of deregulation is one that I've sort of lived with for about 25 years or more over the time that I've been involved in public service. It started when I was in the legislature in the 90s. Just about every legislature around the country was discussing this idea of restructuring or deregulation in one form or another. And then both at my time at the North Dakota Commission and finally at FERC, I've kind of lived with this issue. And I would say that the headline takeaway from my observation of it over the last 25 years, as I said, has been that it's especially for a state like Wyoming, it's a high risk, low reward proposition. And the reason is because you already have some of the most affordable rates in the country as it is today. So it becomes an issue of if things are generally working pretty well, it may not make sense to fix something that isn't broken. Going through the slide deck, and hopefully this will explain why, I would say that I can speak individually. I've reviewed each of the bills, and I'm happy to do that through Q&A. My slide deck is more generally talking about deregulation and restructuring policy in the US, and in different ways would apply to either of the bills. So moving to the first slide where you see a picture of the United States, more than 2 decades now after the initial wave of restructuring, most states still regulate their utilities exactly like the state of Wyoming does, whether they're inside an organized market like an RTO or whether they're outside of an organized market, which is called the bilateral market regions of the country like Wyoming. Most states have retained the traditional model. The way that I've broken this down, and you'll see different slides, and some presenters might have a few different states shaded differently than I do, but I think generally speaking, this would be accepted as how states regulate utilities. The darkest states there are all the fully regulated states like Wyoming. It's a little bit hard to read, but deregulated states are primarily in the Northeast US and then Texas. And then what I list as hybrid states are states that in some way or another may have primarily vertically integrated regulated utilities, but have some sort of exceptions and off-ramps to that. And we'll talk about some of those. The takeaway from this is that the states that tended to deregulate were all of the highest cost states. And they did so because they figured, well, let's try something else. What we've got now isn't working terribly well for us. But after 25 years of experience, we see that it really hasn't changed much for those states that did happen to deregulate. They were the highest cost states going into deregulation. They're still the highest cost states today. And that brings us to the next slide, where I've just outlined here using EIA data, highest and least cost states in the US. You'll see that of the 10 highest cost states, this happens to be of June, but I think if you pick any given month, it would be a relatively similar chart to this. Of the 10 highest cost states, 9 of them are the deregulated states. Now remember, there's only about a dozen states that are deregulated, so it gives you an idea of how things break out. I highlighted Vermont. Vermont is the one state in the Northeast that did not deregulate. They still have relatively high cost rates, not surprising for a lot of reasons. New England has high cost electric rates, but even amongst its region, it's the lowest cost among those other deregulated states in the New England region. Wyoming, on average, is 45th in the country in terms of costs.
So Mr. Carter, these are residential rates.
Mr. Chairman, this graph here is residential rates, correct. In the following slides, I'll break that down, Wyoming average versus other states, and we'll include a breakout of industrial, commercial, and residential.
Which, for some of us, the industrial rates have been a concern in Wyoming, especially with our oil and gas industry.
Understood. Thank you.
Did you have, go ahead, Representative Wester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clark. So if you go back to that last slide, you look at the top 10 states that have the highest power, California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, et cetera, and you're saying that they have the highest power and they're deregulated, or highest power costs. I'm a little worried this might be a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison, because I suspect, haven't confirmed it, but I suspect these are the states, again, California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maine, Rhode Island, that have some of the most stringent and most costly renewable energy standards as well, which of course can incur a lot of costs in their grid system. Is that, am I wrong in that
Mr. Chairman and Representative, I think it's a combination of issues. Part of it is exactly as you suggest. There are states in the country that have adopted very stringent environmental regulations. In addition, the Northeast is just a resource poor part of the country. They're actually very close to a lot of low-cost natural gas. They've chosen not to access that by blocking pipelines. But part of it is, as I indicated, they were the highest cost states going in. I think as a policymaker, looking at the empirical evidence, though, is what you would expect is if deregulation worked, then something would have changed in the intervening years, and maybe they would have come closer down to where the regulated states are. It's just never happened. They were the highest cost. They continue to be the highest cost. And even academic studies that have been done have indicated that deregulation really didn't do much to drive costs lower, which is what they were hoping would happen.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Clark, and I appreciate that, but I think, is it more of a fair conclusion to say maybe it's more nuanced than just saying deregulation does or does not lower costs? Because as you say, in some of these states, the Marcellus is right there in the Northeast, and obviously they are not very prone to tap into that, which of course could really help lower some of the utility costs. So do you think maybe it's a little bit more nuanced than just saying it does or doesn't work?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, there's always a bit of nuance in the energy space. But I would say in general, deregulation has not lowered rates. And I would look at a state like Texas, for example. So in Texas, not all of the state is deregulated. Part of the state is under traditional regulation in the Panhandle and in East Texas and sort of down towards New Mexico. And most of the state, which is contained within ERCOT, its own grid, is deregulated. If you look at even rates within Texas itself, the regulated portions of Texas have always had rates below the deregulated portion of Texas. Those rates sort of narrowed in recent years, but now with high-cost natural gas, in the last 18 months, I would suspect that's going to, again, that gap is going to widen out. And so you would have expected that if deregulation was working within Texas, you'd be able to sort of point to those deregulated rates actually crossing over and being cheaper than regulated rates, but they've not.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
And Mr. Clark, I know that you're getting into the industrial side of things in a moment, but I did just want to emphasize that a lot of the concern here is, at least from my perspective, is large power load projects and location of companies that have tremendous power load demands and their ability to be flexible. Texas is an interesting case study, and so I was actually unaware that portions of Texas weren't in the deregulated system and they were regulated. And you may not know this, but what I would be very curious about is where the large power consuming projects find themselves located. Are they locating themselves in the deregulated areas, which would be my suspicion? Or I would be very interested to know if there's a tremendous draw to the portions of Texas that are regulated at this point in time, and they're avoiding the deregulated areas, which I would find counterintuitive, but would be very interesting. Do you have any insight into that? And if so, I'd love to hear it.
Sure, Mr. Chairman and Senator, that's a great question. And what I have most for you is probably anecdotal sort of information on it as opposed to a hard study or data, but I can probably make some educated guesses. In terms of where the large industrial load is located in Texas, a lot of it tends to be along the Gulf Coast, and it would actually be split between deregulated portions and regulated portions. A lot of that Gulf Coast petrochemical complex is in the regulated section of Texas in the Entergy system, which is that East Texas. And then a fair amount is just on the other side, kind of west of Houston. So I don't know that one system or another is driving that. I've heard anecdotally, and sort of not attributable to any particular producer, but especially in times like this where you have relatively high natural gas prices driving the market, they tend to be much better off in the regulated portions of Texas because the costs are much more predictable. They're less predictable, more volatile in a gas-driven market. When gas is exceptionally cheap, as it had been for several years here, $2, $3, then maybe that tips a little bit. I would say with regard to certain load, like crypto, my guess is that probably is mostly in the deregulated portion, but there's a reason for that wouldn't exist in Wyoming, which is, number one, they can contract on very short term with resources and using their buying power, get a relatively low cost, but then they can also kind of play the market a bit, which is in a market like ERCOT, you can get paid to not be drawing load. And so for an operation like that, they can get paid when they're using the load and developing crypto, or when they shut down, they get paid by other customers as well. So that's an opportunity that I don't think would exist outside of a market.
Mr. Chairman,
context.
and I certainly agree that it doesn't exist in the state of Wyoming, but that's to some degree a consequence of the evolution of the two systems developing over time and what you end up available in both locations. So not all deregulation or regulation is equal. And one thing I don't know off the top of my head for Texas, which has been a concern in Wyoming, is that you couldn't have a circumstance where one company built a reactor and sold power directly to another company, even if it didn't enter the grid. So we preclude that. That's against Wyoming law. Do you know if that is legal in the deregulated areas, the regulated areas of Texas? Could I have company A build a gas reactor and sell without using the grid to company B?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I don't know the answer
Okay.
to that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Picking up, so moving to the next slide, this is just a slide produced by the American Public Power Association, which they have for years tracked deregulated states, regulated states, and the national average with regard to electricity costs. And what you'll see here is just a persistent gap. Regulated states have, since, dating back 25 years, have had on average lowest costs. The regulated states have had the high, or the deregulated states have had the highest costs. What you notice, which I think is notable, besides just that gap, is there tends to be a bit more volatility in the deregulated side, which isn't surprising. And it's oftentimes tied to the cost of natural gas, because in a deregulated market, you're just that much more exposed to the kind of the marginal unit that happens to be running at any given time. Mr. Chairman and committee members, digging in a little closer on the next slide to Wyoming versus national average, you'll see that Wyoming for the last 20 years has had costs on average of all sectors far below the national average on that first slide on the left. Moving to the second slide on the right, this breaks it down. It's a little busier, but it breaks it down between residential, industrial, and commercial. And what you find is certainly in residential and commercial loads, a pretty wide gap between the national average and what Wyoming customers pay. The lowest two lines on that are the industrial rates in both Wyoming and national averages. You'll see that Wyoming, up until just the last couple of years, had a fairly large gap where industrial rates were quite a bit less expensive than the national average. In the last couple of years, just since about 2015, 16, the gap kind of closed and they're about at average. Again, that shouldn't surprise us because those industrial rates, especially in the deregulated markets, are so exposed to gas prices. And I mean, we've never had like the last 5 years that we had with gas prices. What you'll notice right there at the end is that national rates start to creep up. And my guess is you're going to see that gap widen again, where Wyoming will have rates below the national average on the industrial sector.
Yep, go ahead, Representative Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clark, thank you for this information, and my old eyes have a hard time looking at this
Yeah.
chart and especially the colors, but it appears to me that the United States commercial and industrial has flattened out over the past few years and hasn't kept up with the trend that is trending up. Is that because of deregulation that they are able to be a preferred customer and get better rates, or is that because of other factors that I'm not aware of?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, I think it really has to do with gas prices, that the shale gas revolution in the country really has made a difference in power markets, and that they have just flattened out. In fact, in recent years, what you'll see is in any of the organized markets of the country is the wholesale price for generation flattened out, but what has become a bigger and bigger portion of the bill has been the transmission, or the fixed cost, the transmission portion of the bill.
Okay.
So just a few initial takeaways, and then I'll go through some case studies of other states that have tried different flavors of deregulation. One, I would say, if after 25 years deregulation was driving a big public policy advantage and cost savings for consumers, whether they be industrial, commercial, or residential, the disparities that have just been there would start to shrink, but it hasn't happened.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
So the disparity we perceive, though, that we're kind of trying to address is if you're locating a large power consuming facility, you don't do it in Wyoming, and you don't seem to do it in any of the regulated states. You seem to do it in the deregulated states. And I look at, it seems like in any given day, Texas gets more total dollars of investment than we seem to be getting in a year. We were just received once again for the, 1,000th consecutive year, we have the best tax structure in the country. And everything here would be low costs, nearly ideal for large power consuming projects. Workforce is a bit of a challenge, but we have the Front Range and we know that we can draw as much as we need there. Yet the large power consuming projects end up really in Texas or in other states where they can work deals out and figure out how to reduce their costs. So I would say that from the standpoint of consumer cost saving, that first bullet point that you have here makes a lot of sense to me. And again, the industrial power zones it's trying very hard to not change the regulated utility structure for standard rate payers. But trying to thread the needle to recognize that nobody even stops by Wyoming if they have a large energy consumption project, with the exception, and what sort of started this was the cryptocurrency discussion in recent years, but honestly, we're talking more probably about hydrogen and other things at this point in time. But if they do stop by and look, they look at our power costs and the regulated structure, and a lot of times they move on to Texas. So how do you have contrary evidence to that shows that these large power consuming projects, which is really the focus of this committee, trying to resolve that problem, are locating more favorably in regulated utility areas, and that what we're seeing in Texas is in fact anecdotal and inaccurate?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator, so I believe I do. And have some experience from it coming from a state similar to Wyoming, which has low cost profile, but has often struggled with rural economic development type issues. I would suggest that if it was just a matter of low cost, then you sort of already have that. So there may be other issues that are contributing to a state like Texas doing as well as it has in terms of economic development and others. I'd suggest probably has to do with things like available workforce and infrastructure issues and things like that are just available in a more densely populated area like that, that might be tipping the balance. But I would say, especially with recent events in Texas, in the last couple of years where they've had significant reliability events and increasingly will have some cost challenges, you have started to see some of that development move elsewhere. I read an article not too long ago that talked about the Rivian plant, which a number of states were bidding on going to Georgia. And one of the suggestions in the article was that the Texas power woes were a good part of the reason that they decided to site in a regulated environment in the Southeast. There was a similar, I think it was a Toyota battery facility, kind of similar type of issues that I think located in either Tennessee or North Carolina, kind of for similar reasons. There's just more stability in energy prices, and then with the Texas reliability issues, they had concerns. So I think there is some anecdotal evidence that that's happening. I would also point to some of the large tech companies. Not all of them publicize where all of their data centers are, but if you, for those that do, for example, Google, they have something like, I think about a dozen or 14 large data centers scattered across the country. Most of them, maybe all but two, are located in regulated service territory areas. And I suspect it's because they tend to be the lowest cost areas, and they tend to be areas where they locate, where they have really strong telecommunications ties and things like that they can hook up to.
Okay. Representative Danny Ayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clark, would you comment on if deregulation had an impact on the fiasco that happened in Texas a little over a year ago with when their power rates just went crazy, when they had a near meltdown of their grid, et cetera?
Sure, Mr. Chairman and representatives. So I think that there is a nexus between the power rates, what happened, sort of during Winter Storm Uri and regulatory structure. So I would say this: number one, when Uri hit and you had gas prices spike all over the U.S., that was going to affect you whether you're in a deregulated state or whether you're in a regulated state in one form or another. I mean, the base cost of the fuel skyrocketed over a weekend, and it had impacts everywhere. Where the impact was most especially harmful happened to be in the state of Texas, and I think that is at least partially a deregulation story, where the problem in Texas, as I'll talk about in a slide or two, is that market design never supported retention of capacity and never supported planning for resource adequacy, which regulation does. And so what happened is, once they got into a situation where you had conditions that were not favorable weather conditions for intermittent renewables, and you had a number of events related to winter weather, they just didn't have the capacity to provide service to the load. And that's true even if they hadn't lost a lot of units to things like freeze off and well freeze off and things like that. Even had those units been operating, they would have been short of capacity. It's just a market that doesn't support retention of on-demand generation.
Okay. Got your question, Representative? All right. Okay, we'll keep you moving. Oh, go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Representative Western mentioned earlier, I think the problem with your thesis is that the batch of states that have deregulated, ironically, are mostly in the Acela corridor, where median incomes are the highest in the nation and everything costs more in general. I mean, you have the one exception of Texas, which is another story, but I think that's the problem with your thesis. So I guess my question is twofold. I'm very interested in the history of deregulation in the Acela corridor. I mean, what's the history of that? What drove that? What were some of the reasons for that? Because you do have, geographical scale there. I mean, and it's clearly a cluster that has done it. And what's your response to that? Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative. Hopefully I'll fill in some of the gaps on that. They weren't quite the only states that deregulated. One that did, that was a low-cost state, was Montana, and I think their experience is really instructive as to the concern and danger when you're a low-cost state and you deregulate. But in terms of the Northeast, I think what really drove that was, number one, they had the highest power costs in the country, so they figured, why not try something else? And so that, and just sort of the philosophical whiteboard theory of, hey, let's put the risk on investors, and then they can invest in plants. The challenge is you can lose something in resource adequacy planning in that transition. To the Senator Beitman's question earlier about is the regulated model at risk because of all of the changes that are happening in the grid and things that are going on in California and states doing different things. I would actually argue that the deregulated model is actually more at risk than the regulated model. At least with the regulated model, with all of the changes that are happening and with states like California going off and doing what they're doing, at least if you have a regulated state, you continue to have some sort of planning process where you're, as a state or your state commission, if you feel like for your state's residents, they're going to be short of capacity, you can work with or order your utilities to build and retain on-demand generation to help support resource adequacy within your state. Once you deregulate and you unbundle those utilities and you make generators essentially merchant and they're dependent on a wholesale market, which increasingly is dysfunctional, I think that's where you have the bigger problem.
Okay, we'll keep moving. We're going to attempt to stay on the agenda
All right.
schedule, but
I won't go over the rest of
It's
this.
a good topic, though.
Yeah,
Good
no, I'm happy to,
Questions. Yeah.
absolutely. I'll leave this slide as it is. You can read it later, but just some academic studies that sort of back up what I've been talking about here. So California is one case study and a concerning one. They have a very unique regulatory structure in California for lots of reasons. They, coming out of the Western energy crisis, what they have is a state where the utilities themselves, they don't have full deregulation, but the utilities themselves don't own any generation. They're dependent on basically merchant providers. They have had sort of one limited form of, which is why I list them as a hybrid deregulated state. They call it community choice aggregation, which is that just a geographic area can choose to, usually it's a city or a county or something like that, can choose to have some sort of alternative energy supplier supply their energy. The problem with that, and now a third of California's load is served in some way by this kind of quasi-deregulated CCA structure. The challenge there is, again, resource adequacy. Someone has to ensure the stability of the whole system because it's an interconnected grid. And what happened in California, and has happened the last 2 summers most recently, is that if someone's not paying attention to that resource adequacy issue, and all of the individual CCAs are, and in that case, California ISO itself, is building into its model rosy assumptions that when the wind is not blowing and the sun isn't shining, that they'll just be able to import the power from somewhere else. That's where they've fallen down. Is the rest of the West needs that because capacity has been closing and we've had more sort of extreme weather in terms of the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows in the summer and winter. Moving on to Texas, we've talked about this, so I won't belabor it much, but again, the trade-off in Texas was they said, look, let the market decide it, let the prices go as high as they will. That will encourage generation capacity to invest. Unfortunately, because the market structure, in my opinion at least, is pretty fundamentally broken and doesn't support on-demand generation, people don't invest in on-demand generation because that's not where you can make money. You can make money as a zero fuel cost resource that gets paid as if you were an on-demand generator, and that's continued to erode resource adequacy in Texas. Flipping to the next slide, this just shows that prices in the deregulated power market in Texas are on the upswing, and I think that the data always has a little bit of a lag to it because EIA data just tends to, but given Winter Storm Uri, what happened this past summer, where prices have been spiking dramatically in deregulated Texas especially, I think that these trends are going to continue. I wanted to speed up a little bit just to get to Montana because I think it is particularly instructive for Wyoming. Montana might have had the worst experience in terms of deregulation, and they went the whole way with it. In the late 1990s, low-cost state decided to deregulate, and it was based basically on a theory. Competition will prevail and our rates will go even lower. What in fact happened was just the opposite. As the Western energy markets spiraled in the early 2000s, coming out of the Western energy crisis, and then later in sort of the mid-aughts with high natural gas prices spiking, what happened was Montanans were directly exposed to those high market prices, both on the industrial, commercial sides, but also with residential customers. So basically, cheap Montana power was exported to the rest of the region, and Montana's rates rose to the very high regional average. It also has created a long-term capacity problem in Montana. Montana is a state today that on its peak days cannot serve its load from Montana resources. They are dependent on imports. I'm very familiar with the state's largest utility there, and they're constantly exposed to have to go out to the market on high demand days because of the decisions 25 years ago to sell off that generation. They're just sort of consistently capacity short, and they've been digging themselves out of that hole. As I note here, ultimately, Montana re-regulated, at least in part. Industrial is kind of deregulated right now over a certain size load in Montana. But the governor in his signing statement called deregulation an unmitigated disaster for the state. And I suspect that in future years, there are going to be some challenges that Montana has because of that capacity issue that I mentioned. When capacity was relatively plentiful across the West and across the Northwest, might be one thing when you can go out to the market and access that. That is not the case moving forward. Capacity is getting tighter and tighter in the West. There's already loss of load expectations in the Pacific Northwest especially. There's been a lot of coal shutdowns and not enough on-demand resources that are backing that up. This is going to be a very big challenge for that portion of the load, which basically dumps off its resource adequacy issues to the rest of the grid and just contracts on a very short-term basis for energy supply.
Do you have a question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, question. You say the cheap Montana power was exported. What percentage did they export? You're saying that we export about 86% maybe with Pacific. Were they at those kind of levels?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, I don't know historically where Montana was at exactly in terms of imports and exports, and on a day-to-day basis, I don't know exactly where they're at. I can tell you that from a peak capacity, from peak load standpoint, Montana does not have capacity in state to be able to serve its own needs. Montana is also, I should say, a little bit unique in that has a lot of hydro power. There just is, given the historical legacy of the hydro facilities there, which is great if you can get it. I won't spend much time on this slide in terms of challenges of deregulation. This really applies to fully deregulated states where consumers are thrown directly into the marketplace, which probably applies more to the second bill than the first one, but suffice it to say that consumer advocates, attorneys general, have had a lot of concerns in deregulated states that have, especially average retail consumers, suffer consumer protection issues. One final slide, or just a couple final slides here wrapping up. I like this one on the Midwest resource adequacy problem because I think it really highlights the issue once you start having certain large load escape the system and not plan for resource capacity because those loads will tend to contract on a very short-term basis. And utilities can't build 20 and 30-year assets on that sort of business model. This graph on the right refers to unforced capacity within the different zones of the Midwest ISO, or Mid-Continent ISO, which is an RTO. And you'll see the different zones. The one zone sticks out, it's zone 4, which is very capacity short at this point. It's also a zone, MISO, in the most recent reliability reports before FERC. MISO was the most at-risk region of the country this past summer in terms of concern about summer blackouts. And it's really related to one zone, zone 4, which, as you'll see on the chart, is Illinois. The one deregulated state in the entire Mid-Continent Independent System Operator pool is Illinois. It sort of graphically shows the problem. And unless you have some sort of long-term price signal that allows utilities to invest, capacity issues become more and more of a problem. Finally, just wrapping up, there's sort of full deregulation proposals and then kind of limited deregulation proposals. The challenge always with limited deregulation is just a few things. One, you have to be very careful about cherry picking the most profitable customers and then dumping those resource adequacy, long-term capacity needs on the rest of the system and the remaining customers, which can lead to the resource adequacy problems. Usually, in any form of deregulation, there's some sort of complicated stranded cost proceeding that goes on before the commission, and that would have to be had, which basically means the utilities in the state have built and procured resources with the idea that they're going to serve the entire geographic area. If you have certain customers who are allowed to go out on their own and shop, they're stranding investment that was made for their benefit that has to then be recovered by the remaining customers on the system. So some sort of proceeding has to be done to deal with those stranded costs, which would assign them and not the remaining customers the cost of the system. And then you just have the ability for sophisticated customers to be able to do things and manage their load in ways that can impact remaining customers on the system. Final slide, I would just say, I think there is a better way, which is contained within the traditional regulatory model that Wyoming currently has and most states do, which is to retain those things about regulation which are positive, which is that there is a way to provide for resource adequacy, to plan for on-demand generation and capacity additions in a networked industry, and retain those positive things. There usually are ways to deal with kind of the one-off situation of customers who have very specific needs, whether it's through the type of resources that they want to procure or access to different kind of market constructs. But the key with the regulatory model is that the utility and the company that's asking for the kind of the deviation from the tariff have to go before, in this case, your Public Service Commission, and explain why that tariff revision is one that holds other customers harmless. And I think that's a good regulatory check to make sure that resource adequacy and capacity needs are supported, and it's not being done in a way that impacts other customers. All of those tools should be available to the PSC and the utilities as it is today. I don't have any special knowledge of the sorts of tariffs that have been implemented in Wyoming, but my understanding is there have been a number of those sort of efforts to try to kind of tailor a tariff in a way that meets legal standards for the public interest.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clark, so you say that there are options for these utilities and PSCs to deal with these kind of one-off circumstances and situations with these customers.
Yeah.
Mr. Clark, how familiar are you with the timeline and the series of events that have happened in Wyoming over the last 12 to 18 months, specifically in regards to some of these crypto mining operations and their attempts and their failed attempts to establish operations in Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, not terribly. I sort of have heard about it at a general level, but I don't have any real specific in-depth knowledge of the timeline or efforts that were made.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Representative Gray. Oh, Representative Hunter, sorry. I was looking at you.
That's all right, I'm short here, so. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Clark, very, very informative presentation. I appreciate the effort you went into preparing this. A lot of the conversations we have had over the past several months have centered around cryptocurrency, crypto mining, and I think that stems from the reason why we're here talking about this. As I've looked through some of the tariffs of the various different public utilities that we have, I see nothing for crypto mining. There's tariffs for irrigation pumps, tariffs for street lights, tariffs for outdoor lighting, which I don't know the difference between a street light and an outdoor light, but apparently there's different tariffs for those. But we don't have anything for a super large industrial customer such as a crypto mining operations. When a utility gets a certificated area for public needs and necessity, it basically says that they not only will they be the only supplier, but they will have the resources to be able to supply whatever is needed in that area. And when a crypto mine comes in, that's a very large power supply, which may need some infrastructure, but we need to protect the rest of the rate payers as well, so they don't get so they have to hold the bag in case the crypto walks away. So is it possible to handle all of this with just a new tariff specifically designed for crypto mining rather than go through all the deregulation and things that we're talking about today?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, perhaps, but I would say crypto is a particularly challenging sort of one-off situation to try to deal with in a tariff. And the reason why is the amount of load that they add to the system is extraordinary. You may be able to deal with upfront costs regarding network interconnection to the transmission grid, transmission upgrade costs, and things like that, because typically I would guess a utility is going to ask for payment upfront on those kind of things from the crypto facility, because you don't want to build out a large transmission grid and then 2 months later they decide to pull up stakes and customers or the company are left with that hanging. The bigger issue then becomes the capacity issues of having to serve that type of load when you don't have any certain, it's a very lumpy investment, very large investment, but you don't have a lot of certainty about whether that load is going to be there, 5 or 10 years down the line. And the type sort of assets that you need to build from a generation capacity standpoint are those that require significant investment. They're not short-term sorts of load.
Senator Rothfuss.
I just wanted to raise the fact that in, I think, 2019, we did work with Black Hills Power to create a new tariff. It wasn't called a cryptocurrency tariff because it was a generalized large load tariff. And when there is load available, it does meet the need, and that is what I believe Black Hills has entered into, I think, some of your agreements with, and look to Mr. Bush to kind of speak about how much they've used that at this point in time. So if load is available, and if the certificated region boss, we'll call them, the utility wants to engage, they have the power to. And well, literally, if they have the power to, they have the tariff available. The challenge is that they don't necessarily have the power available. And honestly, they don't have to really engage. They can make a judgment call about the creditworthiness of the intended purchaser and then basically say, no, we don't want to. If you don't like that answer, go to the PSC, and maybe in 12 to 18 to 24 months, you can maybe get some power from us, or at least get the process started.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Representative Heiner, Senator Rothfuss is right. In 2019, we passed legislation. It's referenced actually in the draft of 52. Mr. Fuller went over it. It was the blockchain interruptible service tariff, is what we called it, and it's let's see, it's on page 5, 37.3.116. Basically, what it did was it allowed us, as we were getting a lot of inquiries from Bitcoin miners coming to Cheyenne, it allowed us to look at the ability to serve them while protecting other existing customers. So basically what the tariff says is we can go out to the market, buy the power to serve that crypto miner, and then, or any large user really. And then it protects, the PSC reviews it and makes sure that it's all protecting the existing customers. And basically we take the risk as a company on whether we're going to serve these folks. We did just sign up a group in Cheyenne. They're a Wyoming company, roots here in Casper, and I think you've heard from one of their members before in front of the committee. We signed them up this summer. It's about 45 megawatts start, which is a sizable load. Cheyenne on average for us is about 240 megawatts a day, so 45 is a big load. They can increase up to 75. So it's a good deal for us. We did sign them up under this tariff, and we hope they are going to start operation here at the end of the year, beginning of next year in Cheyenne. But that tariff was created just for that purpose of protecting existing customers and working with large loads like that. And I think we've also shown the ability to use existing statute when it comes to deals with some of the larger data centers that are in Cheyenne, and some of our other large customers, that existing statute really does allow quite a bit of flexibility for these folks, so, and others. And so I'll leave it at that, but it is there.
The follow-up question to that, though, that's kind of been a concern is what would you say the total number of megawatts or gigawatts of application or of interest that came to Black Hills relative to the 45 to 75? And I don't know what the total amount you're providing now is, but it seems like it's an order of magnitude, if not better.
Mr. Chairman, let me see, I think I have that figure. So as we've talked about before, we did a kind of a reverse RFP back summer 21 now, as a company, because we were getting bombarded with so many crypto mining requests. We said, okay, here's the process. Please fill out the form. Tell us how much power you need. Tell us, some of the basic facts of your business and what you need. We had about 18 requests through that RFP process. We had all of those requests added up to about 2 gigawatts worth of demand, which is about 7 times more than Cheyenne's peak load. And it really came down to, we found this company to be one that worked with us. They were willing to come back and actually discuss some of the infrastructure needs that were going to be required building out to their location. When you're moving that much power, it takes a lot. And the ability to serve them, 45 megawatts is something that we had available at the time. Some of these companies, again, I'm not in all these conversations, but anecdotally, some of the meetings I have been in, they start at 50 megawatts, they move up to 150 megawatts, they move up to 250 megawatts within a year or two, depending on how long it takes to get their mining equipment to their facility. It's a huge load. That's a lot of power that honestly we would like to serve if we can. We're trying to grow. I think there has been a little bit of a misperception that we're not interested in growing. I think the evidence is contrary to that with the way that we have helped with the city of Cheyenne and some of the growth that's happened down there. We work closely with the economic development groups across the state, not only in Cheyenne and our electric service territory, but in our gas territories and a lot of the communities that you all represent. So we are trying to grow. We are trying to grow responsibly, and we are trying to work with the companies that are willing to work with us. So that's kind of the story of where we were. It was about 2 gigawatts of demand.
Yep.
And again, and Dave, I appreciate all the time that we've spent talking about this, that we produce that much power in the state. It's just that we export 85% of the state's power. So theoretically, the state of Wyoming had the power to meet this, but it was all obligated to out of state and to the multi-state agreements, to all of the other projects. So the regulated structure we have right now gives, as I understand it, you the opportunity to basically say, no, we can't meet that. And yet the agreement of the regulated structure is that you have to say, yes, we can meet that. I mean, that's literally the trade, is that our regulated utilities are obligated to say, yeah, we'll get you the power. Here's the reasonable timeline, we'll build it in. The nuance that I don't think is fully appreciated that legislation is trying to address, and I hope we can find a solution, is that the regulated utilities get to evaluate the creditworthiness or which is the best candidate, pick that best candidate and say no to the rest, and then the rest of them would have to go through the PSC and start a long process. Instead, what do? They go to Texas, which is what most of these companies did. So the opportunity lost to the state of Wyoming to be producing, it's getting done,
Yeah,
it's happening.
we got to move through our topics so we can get to the bills.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if we could just ask some questions of the witnesses for right now.
Sure.
And then we'll debate a little bit later
Appreciate
on.
that, Mr. Chairman.
So I had my co-chair, Representative Heiner, then Western, let's get her questions, bounce it out. We got to get moving.
Mr. Chairman, how are those requests going now since the collapse of that industry? Are you getting a lot of requests for positioning and more power and that kind of stuff since the first of the year?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, I don't know for sure. I'd probably have to ask our business development folks. It's definitely slowed down. And I think part of that is the price of Bitcoin itself has decreased quite a bit. I think part of that could be just volatility in that industry. I don't know enough about it. Senator Rothfuss and Representative Western and others know a lot more about how all the crypto world works than I do. But as far as I can probably guess, I think that the requests have diminished somewhat.
Representative Hunter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bush, so you mentioned that with this new customer, this crypto mining customer, you were able to generate a separate tariff that took care of their needs without encumbering the rest of your ratepayers. Is that correct? So without the deregulation, you were able to meet the needs of the crypto mining industry, perhaps only with that excess capacity that you had, but we didn't have to go deregulated to be able to do this, right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, yes, that's correct. And to one of Senator Office's points, a lot of times we don't say no to these other companies. We say we have, here are the stipulations that we have, price, build out of infrastructure, those sorts of things. And many times we don't hear back.
Representative Western?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bush, out of those 18 applicants, how many of them met all the criteria that Black Hills had for those applicants?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, that I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Go ahead.
What were the requirements on that RFP?
I could get, Mr. Chairman, I could get you probably the document that we gave to them. I don't have that in front of me. It's generally, again, how much power do you need, business background, and your experience in the industry and that kind of thing, your intent to move to Cheyenne, security of land, that sort of thing.
Did the working group discuss this when we met? So we had the working with these issues, discuss it all on this particular tariff?
Mr. Chairman, the technical conference?
Yeah, sorry. Technical conference sounds more
We went,
sophisticated, yeah.
sorry, Mr. Chairman, we went through a lot of details. We didn't go through like our RFP process page by page, other than to say we had one, and then I think you've heard the kind of the breakdown of what happened at the technical conference. It was more of a wide-ranging discussion on the bill.
We've had opportunities to discuss this and explore this. Is that fair?
I would say that's a fair assessment.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. All right. Quick question. Yeah.
So, Mr. Clark, and we appreciate having you here today and bringing your expertise. A lot of the discussion was generalized and deregulation bad. And that tends to be the specter that's brought and has been brought as the primary argument against the specific industrial power zone legislation is always, well, deregulation has collapsed all of these things. So it's never anything specific to this bill. It's always the specter of full-scale deregulation turns out catastrophically. As I look through the better way and then the key considerations of limited deregulation, it seems like literally every one of those points is addressed by the legislation. Do you have any specific indictments of industrial power zones or concerns, or even better, ways that industrial power zones could be strengthened so that it's more effective?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, sure. So I didn't specify, I didn't delve into the individual bills themselves. Clearly, the second one dealing with more kind of direct deregulation, I think, is particularly problematic. With regard to specifically the industrial zone bill, I have to admit, as I read it, about the first half, I thought I knew where things were going, and then in the second half of the bill, there was some confusion that I had. So as I read the first portion of the bill, especially as it related to only receiving and consuming power from within that zone, to me, it sort of sounded like, I think, as you may have indicated earlier, almost like a self-generation, like a microgrid walled off from the rest of the network. And I don't know enough about Wyoming statute and what's permitted through PSC rules, but I would guess that if it was purely kind of disconnected from the rest of the grid, you might be able to do that without this. As I moved into the second part of the bill, and it talks about the commission assessing impacts on other customers, then it told me, well, no, this really, it's a part of the interconnected grid. It's not, sort of purely a microgrid process. And that's where that's where I think it becomes more difficult, because what you have is the those entities, because of the way that resource adequacy has worked in other states that have had some form of limited sort of retail access deregulation, that's often where the coffee gets spilled between the lip and the cup, is on these long-term resource adequacy issues where some entity has to provide for, plan, and ensure stability of the system and capacity that that meets those peak days. Because one of the things about electricity markets is to provide reliability. You can't just build on an average basis the amount of generating capacity you need. You have to build for, resources above and beyond what actually sort of reserves. And that's where that sort of thing becomes a problem. I would just say one other second part of it that I had questions about that I really didn't understand is I guess it's on page, no, I don't have the page number on it. 7, on page 7, subpart F, where it talks about the Public Service Commission regulating rates charged for the use of transmission lines transmitting generated outside of an industrial power zone to the industrial power zone. One thing I think you should talk to the commission about and maybe talk with legal counsel about is I'm not sure that the PSC would have the authority to do that, because once you're talking about unbundled generation selling over a transmission line, I suspect that's purely FERC jurisdictional. Yeah.
Yep, go ahead, Senator.
Yep. So second point last, yeah, that's a discussion we had. It is FERC, but from the statute, it's the PSC that basically is going to take the FERC number and hand it over, since we tend to task our state agencies better than we can task FERC. So absolutely. Yeah. But with regard to the question about the microgrid concept, that's not allowed in Wyoming right now. And so that's one of the things this is trying to address, would be a fully isolated island, no lines in, no lines out. You still can't do it. But the other consideration, getting at the second concept, is you may have an external power provider, and then they're willing to sell into the system for a certain price, but the local franchisee is unwilling to sell at that price. It was trying to provide allowance for that, where you'd have to pay the freight to get it there, so to speak, and then have the PSC approve it. Again, it gets to some of the limited points that you had. So what are your thoughts on that, to the extent that the PSC reviews it, and your concern was, well, somebody has to be watching it to ensure that the ratepayers are protected. It's literally what's in the bill. The ratepayers are protected by this PSC doing just that. How is that not a remedy for your concern?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, I think where my concern would be is once you unbundle portions of that power supply delivery, because remember, with the traditional vertically integrated utility, where you have the utility owns generation, owns transmission, and owns the distribution, it's called a bundled utility. That's within an understate jurisdiction. You sort of solely have jurisdiction over that. If you're talking about some sort of power zone idea, where I would guess it would be probably power marketers or some other entity that's not affiliated with the utility or selling power, and that's a wholesale sale under the Federal Power Act, that becomes a FERC jurisdictional issue. And so the resource adequacy planning that can happen in the bundled utility is quite clear to me with regard to who has authority. It's the state, it's Wyoming PSC, that can ensure that once you have this sort of unregulated, or at least regulated by FERC entity, resource adequacy becomes a bigger challenge, because someone still has to ensure that stability of the grid. Someone still has to ensure that there are reserves on top of what that entity is procuring for on those days when there are, stability issues. You lose a generator somewhere in the system, and it has to be made up. And that's where kind of allowing certain entities out of the traditional regulatory compact, I think, can become a challenge.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, real quickly, thanks to folks listening in back at Cheyenne headquarters, I do have a copy of our RFP that I can email to the committee once I figure out how to do it on my phone and everything. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Thank you. If anybody really wants it.
All right, so at this point, we're going to take public testimony. Well, I'm just going to find out, because I'm actually going to keep us on schedule and move the discussion of this till later this afternoon. Seems how we burned all the time allotted. Who wants to testify on these two bills that are here? So you got 1, 2, Bruce, okay. I can't understand what the people online want to do. Their comments, are all of them wanting to testify?
Mr. Chairman, it looks like Lee Filler and Nicholas Blair have raised their virtual hand.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do, because we have other people that traveled, and this discussion can obviously drag on forever, is we're going to go ahead and shuffle our agenda, take public comment on this after the last agenda item for today, and then we'll debate these bills as late as you guys want to tonight, till we get this put to rest. So with that, we'll remove that agenda. So next up is an update from the Integrated Test Center. All right, Mr. Baker, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason Baker, I'm the Managing Director of the Wyoming Integrated Test Center. And wanted to spend a few minutes here just kind of giving the committee and folks an update on what's happening at the facility, kind of a forward look at some of the projects coming in, as well as kind of explain kind of some of the things that we're looking at as we look out to the future a few years. So first of all, I think it's really important to say that the test center has been a tremendous success story for the state. And I think it's a great example of the state putting in some seed money that has been leveraged many times over. So, you know, everything from the X Prize competition coming in, unfortunately with COVID, it really kind of threw a wrench into things, mostly because 3 of the international teams that were supposed to come weren't able to come. But, you know, at the end of the day, we have over $100 million worth of projects in the pipeline. So if I kind of move to my next slide here, talking about some of the highlights. So, you know, as kind of a refresher for the group, the test center was authorized in a budget footnote back in 2014. And the state
Could you pull your
appropriated.
microphone closer or speak louder? Or?
Sorry.
Thank you.
And the state appropriated $15 million to go towards the construction and operation of the facility, with the condition that certain, or with the condition that certain other measures were met. And one of that was finding at least $5 million in cost share from utilities. And did a little bit better than that, actually found $6 million. So the original budget was $21 million, provided by $1 million from NRECA, $5 million from Tri-State, and then Basin Electric internally is estimated they've contributed about $7 million in kind. That's through equipment use, construction management, lease of the ability to use the ground at Dry Fork Station. So a pretty considerable contribution from everyone. The project itself, we had about a $15 million budget set aside for engineering, design, construction. We came in 18% under budget, which in turn allowed us enough funds to operate it for 4 years more than originally intended. So the original intent was about a 10-year project, but we were able to go 14. So Earlier this year, we were able to extend our lease with Basin Electric through the rest of the decade, which aligns really well with kind of the project pipeline that we have laid out. We've also been working with the Department of Energy on how to utilize the facility beyond just coal flue gas testing. And there's some infrastructure that we could add that in essence dilutes the coal flue gas. So coal flue gas is about 12.5% CO2. Natural gas combined cycle is roughly 6%. So if we put on a blower system, we could replicate natural gas combined cycle flue gas. And DOE said that if you did that, we would allow natural gas FOA projects to be sited there. So again, just trying to think how can we take that asset and use it for a broader range of purposes. Another thing that we've done that we're pretty excited about, and I guess pretty proud of the fact, is we developed an in-kind cost share formula with DOE that they approved. And for most projects, it really depends on what it is, but it's either an 80-20 cost share, sometimes it's 50-50 cost share. Well, all of that money that we have used, that 21 million, we were able to allocate that out as cost share. So for example, sometimes projects, you know, if it's a $50 million project, they need to come up with 10 million in their own non-federal cost share. And oftentimes they don't always need the cash, but they need the allocation. And so we were able to come up with, I guess probably the easiest way to describe it is a depreciation schedule. So in Sargent and Lundy, which was the engineering firm that designed the ITC, designed it, they said, we figured this thing has about a 5-year usable life. And so we were able to allocate those costs out a certain amount every month and then provide that back to our research tenants. So in essence, we took that $15 million that the state appropriated in 2014 and leveraged it into over $80 million in more grants. So no cash, but we were able to use it and multiply that many times over.
Representative Burkhart, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. Mr. Bigger, how much would it cost to add this infrastructure to allow natural gas testing?
So
Natural gas.
yeah, so we had Sargent Lundy last fall do a feed study on that. And at the time, they said it would be about 2.5 million. We're pulling some numbers together again, and they figure it's probably about 3.2 to 3.5 million today with inflation.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Beggar, who is on the hook to pay that money to do that modification?
Well, as of right now, we don't have that modification planned. We do plan to, and I'll talk about a little bit, kind of bring a suite of potential options to DOE as they're thinking about their infrastructure needs to host, you know, the wide array of projects that they have coming down the pipe. So our hope is DOE would pay for 80% of it if that time came.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So the other 20% would come to the state of Wyoming?
Or private sources, yes.
Thank you.
On Sunday, I guess 5 days ago, the ITC was formally accepted into an international organization called the International Test Center Network. So we became the 14th qualified facility around the world that hosts larger scale carbon capture. And so they have a pretty high bar to be accepted. You actually have to be conducting post-combustion or I guess carbon capture research on the ground using real flue gas at a certain level. And the other facilities, the National Carbon Capture Center is one. You know, they're all over. There are a couple in Australia, a couple in Norway, I think one in the UK. So it's a really good organization to be a part of, to really do a lot of information sharing and understanding how you manage projects of this scale and the types of results that they're seeing. And then kind of lastly, you know, we worked really closely with the federal delegation, Senator Barrasso in particular, in his roles on some of the committees to authorize funding for facilities. You know, a lot of the research that has been appropriated lately is going towards the actual R&D projects, but they need to be mindful of the fact that they actually need places on the ground to do that type of work. So thanks to our federal delegation, and in the 2020 energy bill, there was a provision that allows for the funding of qualified carbon capture facilities. I think that's $25 million a year, up to 5 years. Kind of our next slide is just kind of a quick graphic to show the sort of the scale and range and the size of these projects. You know, if you going from bench scale university work, you know, that initial kind of proof of concept up to commercialization is probably 3 or 4 generations of scale up, learning a little bit more, learning how to engineer the system, de-risking, and then once you start getting bigger, it's systems integration. You know, a lot of people hear about the Kemper project as being a failure, and it really wasn't a failure of the technology. The challenge in that was when they tried to integrate 5 or 6 independent systems into an operating power plant, and scaling up too quickly. So as projects move from those smaller scale ones to the bigger ones, those are the lessons that they're trying to learn. And the unique thing about the ITC is we do have the ability to host a project all the way up to 20 megawatt equivalent scale. And if something is successful at that range, really the next level is full scale commercialization. And the ITC is the only facility of that size in North America. Kind of quickly talking about the tenants that we have coming in. COVID certainly upset the schedule and created a little bit of a log jam. But next spring, we expect to be really, really busy out there. MTR has a membrane technology. They won a $65 million grant from DOE about 2 years ago. And they're slated to start construction next spring as soon as the weather breaks. They've been trying to speed that up. They were at one point even hoping maybe they could start some work this fall. But actually procurement and supply chain issues have created some challenges for them as well as the rest of the project. So they're now looking at next spring. GTI Energy has another project, I think it's about an $18 million DOE project. And they'll start construction a little bit later in 2024 and test in 2025. Kawasaki Heavy Industries has a project. It's about a $10 million project to test a dry sorbent capture technology. And they should be on site for about 2 years.
Question here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, Mr. Beggar, the GTI plan to start construction, is that contingent on modifying the ITC to do, excuse me, simulate natural gas?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, no, that is that FOA that they were awarded under was a coal gas simulation. So all of the projects I do have listed here are for coal gas simulation. TDA is a research company out of the Denver area. They're actually testing right now up there on a sorbent system that they have. And then the last one is green ore. That's a technology that came out of Columbia University, and it's a utilization technology actually. And they've successfully demonstrated that and have a pilot facility in China that takes flue gas off of a steel smelter and then uses the steel slag as a calcium input to make calcium carbonates, which does have a It's a pretty valuable product. And Powder River Basin coal is naturally very high in calcium. And so the thought is, can you take the flue gas off a PRB facility, use fly ash as the calcium input to create carbonates? And they've done some early scale bench work, and it does look positive. And right now, the partners in that is J-Coal out of Japan. And internally, they're kind of reviewing as to whether they want to go to the next phase, which would be a demonstration project at the test center. The next picture is a kind of the schematic of that $65 million MTR project. That's we'll start construction next spring. That's about a 10 megawatt project, which would be about 200 ton per day. And so it's very significant. And the neat thing about MTR is it's a really good example of a technology that's doing exactly what Wyoming wants it to do, leading to hopefully commercial deployment. And what I mean is simultaneously with this project, MTR is doing a full-scale FEED study with Basin Electric that's funded by the Department of Energy. And based upon the results of the pilot, that would be a major determining factor in whether they build a full-scale commercial system at that site. And another link in that are the carbon-safe wells that SER is working on with DOE. So you really have kind of a solution in sight for the Dry Fork Power Station, where capture technology that has been identified, as well as sequestration disposal opportunity, half a mile to the south. The next drawing is, again, kind of a schematic of the Kawasaki system that'll start construction probably next May is what they said earlier this week. And what they want to do there is, instead of a liquid amine solvent that like Petronova or Boundary Dam uses, they have a dry powdered sorbent. Chemically, it does the same thing, but sorbents could have some potential benefits in lower energy inputs, as it's a temperature swing that allows sorbents and solvents to capture and then release the CO2. And the promise, I guess, of the Kawasaki system is they feel like that temperature swing is narrower, and therefore your operational expenses should be lower. This particular test that they plan to do is they're going to bring sorbent in, and they're just going to run it as many times as they can to cycle that and check for degradation and how long sorbent lasts in a system like that. Sulfur, SOx, has a really negative impact on amine systems. So typically you have to put a polisher on there to completely remove the sulfur dioxide out of an amine-based system. So even though Dry Fork Station has SOx controls on the power plant, there's still a fraction or a tiny amount of SOx that makes it up through the stack. So they want to see how all of that impacts the lifespan of their sorbent system. Kind of talking a little bit about these opportunities looking forward is, back in 2014, 2015, when we were pulling the ITC together, we really looked closely at the National Carbon Capture Center to see what they do, how they do things, and trying to complement what they do there in Alabama as opposed to compete with them. And we have a really great relationship with them, and they're very helpful. And some of the projects we have coming are, they cut their teeth at the National Carbon Capture Center. But that facility is changing. There's 5 units on that site. 4 of those 5 were converted to natural gas in 2016 and are planned to close by 2018. the one remaining coal unit that has been providing the flue gas to the National Carbon Capture Center will convert to gas in 2025. So after 2025, National Carbon Capture Center will not have a coal flue gas stream available for technologies.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Question. I think you said we'll close by 2018. The printed thing here says 2028. Is
Mr.
that-
Chairman,
this incorrect?
I misspoke if that's what I
Oh,
said.
okay.
So they converted to natural gas in 2016 and are slated to close by 2028. So my mistake. The National Carbon Capture System, or excuse me, NC3 is called, they are a DOE-funded research facility. And oh gosh, probably the last 20 years, they have done a series of 5-year contracts with DOE. The last one was renewed in 2020, and that's $140 million over the life. And it's widely rumored that since they will no longer have coal flue gas, that contract will not be renewed in 2025. And DOE is, again, you know, with the substantial amount of carbon capture funds that were put in the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act and those types of things, is they desperately need places to host projects. Some early conversations.
I guess, and I just, maybe you're going to answer this, Mr. Beggar, but, you know, what is the governor's office doing to analyze, you know, what Alabama did to make Alabama attractive for this project, and what is Wyoming looking at? Okay, what boxes do we have to check? Just be significant. You're going to answer that. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, we have been talking to the governor's office as well as SER, kind of everybody playing in that space as the best way to go about that. And we have had some initial conversations with DOE regarding funding for infrastructure. You know, they do have the authorization in the 2020 energy bill, and then longer term. And so there is a willingness to do something. And it brings me to my next slide, is some of the challenges of how we get there. You know, that, like, as I mentioned, the test center itself was authorized in a budget footnote back from 2014. And some of that language that was put in there at that time, we have found to make operations a little troublesome, specifically some of the intellectual property requirements and provisions, as well as how ownership of the facility is structured. You know, I won't go through these things line by line, but clearly, you know, that there's kind of a once in a lifetime amount of carbon capture funding that is available. And we're trying to get our ducks in a row to be in the best position to bring as much of that to Wyoming as we can. You know, the ITC stakeholders, Basin Electric, Tri-State, certainly the Wyoming, Basin Electric, you know, they do want to see this grow and evolve. National Carbon Capture Center started back in the 90s as the power systems development facility, looking at, you know, new types of combustion turbines and things like that, that led to like supercritical technology. And as certain technology milestones were met, that facility has evolved 2 or 3 times. And the ITC may need to do that as well. So, you know, yeah, we've been working closely with the governor's office to figure out exactly what that roadmap looks like and how we do that. But we do have some challenges in the fact that we are not a legal, we don't have the same sort of legal status as, say, SER, EORI, and even EERC in North Dakota. But we do work really closely with them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Beggar, I'm somewhat familiar with removing CO2 from natural gas, and we've used all of the processes that you've talked about, amine, solvents, and sorbents, and membranes. And with each one of these applications, the overall problem we've had is with filtration because of contamination and plugging of the media and things like that. During your testing, are you also experimenting with other ways to remove contaminants to make these different processes work longer and more effectively? Because that was our main problem in natural gas.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, I will fully admit that I am not an engineer. I am not the technical guy on the ground. I know enough to be dangerous, and certainly the types of problems that you mentioned are the problems with membranes and solvents and the types of, I guess, questions they're trying to get answered to do that. We're kind of an agnostic host facility. The research teams that come in, we sign NDAs with them, but we're not actively a part of their research team and their group and following the exact kind of milestones that that they meet. That makes sense.
Okay. All right, you're just about there, so
I'm
go
just
ahead.
about there?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In looking at your slide that says looking into the future, I'm wondering, is there an opportunity to partner with, say, SER to do a pass-through grant as these funds become available and take advantage of their legal structure that currently exists? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sherwood, absolutely. Actually, this morning, had breakfast with the director of SER and talking a little bit about that. And that is one of the options that the governor is considering because they do have that sort of expertise and capabilities, for sure.
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Baker, I'm on your last slide. It says funding for infrastructure improvements. Quite a few of them here. Where does all the money come from?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart. So what you're seeing there are things that we have identified as amenities and benefits that could help entice research projects. And what we plan to do is sit down with DOE in the near future. It's kind of an a la carte kind of approach. Here's our menu of things that we have identified. As they're thinking about how they're structuring the FOAs and the research grants that they have, what of those make the most sense? So all of them, some of them, maybe they have their own, but ultimately that would be put forth in a funding request to DOE, that's baked in. For example, if you did use SER as sort of the pass-through, those administrative costs would have to be baked into that as well, and also technical support. So it'd be a fairly sizable funding request to DOE for sure.
So follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So I guess, Mr. Baker, what I'm looking for is how much money from the state?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, if we, I guess to do everything on that list is approximately $50 million.
To the state of Wyoming, Mr. Chairman. Is that to the state of Wyoming?
That is just the overall cost of all of that. The hope, that doesn't include any administrative costs, technical support. I mean, you're probably 60 to 75 million at that, adding those things in. It would be an 80-20 cost share. So if you went to DOE and they're willing to pick up 80% of that, so you're down to 10 to 15.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any comments? Okay. Anybody, any public comment on the integrated test center from anyone? Okay. We'll close out. I'm going to, the reason I wanted this update for the committee, 12 years pushing carbon capture, I'd like to see us stay focused on this. You folks from Campbell County should really be interested in it. As we start to see some carbon capture occur in the private sector, this research is still attracts attention to Wyoming. It's good research. It's a way to find a better solution to it. But the history of this, we go back, we're coming up on about a decade, which was an initiative that came out of Governor Mead's office. And it is something that I think the legislature, if this is what the future legislature wants to see an initiative move forward, needs to keep an eye on it, keep a hand on the helm, and make sure that it is effective and not just something standing out there that we keep throwing money at, but something that is netting results. So that is why I wanted to have that update for all of you. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was thinking a little about this as we were going on what you were saying. I mean, I'd like to get your expertise on this. I mean, do you have any thoughts on how we do ROI on this? I mean, how the legislature could do it? I mean, obviously, we want to decouple it from the folks managing it. And you know, what's the ROI? What have we gotten from this since 2014? I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but do you have any thoughts on that? Because I was going to ask that question.
Yeah, and so let me give you an analogy on my first year, and 12 years ago, we had modeled the Rock Springs uplift for carbon for CO2 storage, right? And an extensive modeling project that quite a bit of money went into. It was public information. We ended up not being able to test it because the prices of CO2 had went up with enhanced oil recovery. But yet, when we start to talk about some of the companies that are looking at coming in the hydrogen area in particular, and think of that type of research that was out there has been very beneficial to start drawing people in. So it's one of those research things that's difficult. Every now and then you stumble across this changes the whole game, whether we're using absorption technique rather than the solvent. Again, I think you're looking at research is research. You hope for the magic bullet, but the main thing is to keep Wyoming, and we have a former legislator from North Dakota here, you know, I'll just say our coal is far superior to the lignite they're trying to peddle in North Dakota. But yet North Dakota is way out ahead of us in terms of being a place to go for research and development because of their center that, yeah. So I think Representative Gray, that's just something for our legislature to be thinking about. How do we make Wyoming, and of course I'm partial to it, but Campbell County, one of those areas that people think of when they think about coal and think about moving us forward with energy. So, okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and move on and Katie, I see that you've got your student here. So the next item on our agenda, and we're about 4 minutes ahead, is apprenticeships. We do have a bill draft, which is a pretty simple bill draft, but Katie, you know, you had asked me a favor, and because I'm such a generous person, but you had a student you wanted to come and say a few words to our committee. Yeah, so please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Katie Legursky with the Associated General Contractors of Wyoming. I do appreciate the time and allowing us to go first today. You guys have heard from industry, you have heard from businesses on this particular topic. The one thing that you have not heard from is from a student on why the work-based learning opportunities, student learner agreements are important. Obviously, these type of programs are called something different, whether it's on-the-job training, but they are different across the board. So I thought it was important for the committee to hear directly from a high school individual. So I brought with me Marco Glassock from just up north, and I'd like to turn it over to him to hear directly from his experience on doing one of these projects.
Okay, so I'm hard of hearing.
Marco.
Okay, last name?
Classic.
Okay. All right. Marco, introduce yourself, who you are, and welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Marco Glassick, and I am a high school senior. Not knowing what I wanted to do after high school was a huge question I had entering my junior year. I had simply no clue what I wanted to do after high school. I chose to take a class through Buffalo High School that would hopefully put me on track to find my interests after high school. I was very fortunate enough to have a teacher willing to help me through this process of finding what my dream job was. Through the first semester of Working Smart, I took dozens of surveys to find my interests that could pertain to a certain occupation. I've been a farm shop and wood shop kid all through high school. I love working on projects and building with my hands, and I decided to run with it. Working Smart is set into two categories, the first being an internship and the second being OJT or on-the-job training. My teacher was soon on the search for local businesses that I could spend weeks with at a time shadowing to see if I had any interest in a particular occupation. Luckily, I had another teacher approach me about my interests. After discussing my interests, she gave me the phone number to an old high school friend that is a local electrician in Buffalo. I soon took the time to call up Ruby Electric. I explained what I was interested in and what I was trying to achieve through the Working Smart program. I started the following week by observing for close to an hour a day, and I wanted to know what the day looked like for a local electrician. After 1 week of observing, I returned on Monday to find a small tool belt with the bare necessities to start helping out around job sites. I look forward to going and helping out every day, and by the end of my semester, I was heading out to job sites and getting paid to help with the work that I was allowed to do. I earned a summer job while going through the process of obtaining my first electrical apprentice card. I returned this year as a senior and started the process of OJT. I now work every day for close to 2 hours during the school day and have recently begun working on classes towards my journeyman's exam to take hopefully right after college. None of this would have been possible without the Working Smart program at Buffalo High School. Without a doubt, work-based learning, student learner agreements, or OJT programs, whatever you wish to call them, should be available to all junior and seniors throughout the state of Wyoming. It made all the difference in my education. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions. Thank you.
Committee? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Glassick, if you would not have had this program available, what do you think you would have done?
Mr. Chairman, I honestly have no clue. Like I said, I love being a farm shop kid. I love building stuff and wood shop as well. And I was a little bit clueless about what I wanted to do, and I had multiple ideas, but I truly had no idea until I actually got the opportunity to go and experience some things of everyday work life with those in my community that do partake in those activities.
So follow up, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Glassick, so you've decided you like the electrical work and that you're moving towards a certificate in electrical work as an electrician, and then on to your master's, I assume?
Yes.
Okay.
I would, I'm currently taking classes through Central Wyoming College as I need classes before I can take my journeyman's exam. And so after I finish all my classes and I finish all the required hours, I will be taking my journeyman's exam and then hopefully taking my master's to one day own my own business.
Thank you.
Yep, Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Glassick, thank you for being here. I'm sure this is very scary for you. Appreciate your courage in standing forth and coming in front of this committee. But one of the things that we're concerned about is getting the word out about this Work Smart program. You were fortunate that one of your instructors alerted you to the fact that it's out there, but as I've discussed this with officials in some of the school districts, they're not even aware that this program is available. What do you feel would be beneficial for us to get this disseminated more effectively to the students so that they can take advantage of it as you have, Mr. Glassick?
Mr. Chairman. So I wasn't really sure about this opportunity at first, and working with our counselors through the high school, you kind of talk about what you want to achieve after high school and some of the scholarships you want to be able to experience and earn. And it was actually brought through one of my counselors that she had advocated for, and she said, I want you to give this a try. And being a small town Wyoming kid, I thought that we oftentimes get experiences that not many other kids get to experience. And so I kind of talked with my counselor, and she said there's a lot of kids have no clue what they really want to do after high school, and it worries a lot of kids, and it worried me. And so talked to my guidance counselor, and she offered the opportunity to maybe go find somebody in the community to help guide me through this process.
I have a quick question. What about your friends? Do you have friends, buddies that have taken advantage of this, or is the word sort of spreading? What's your general feel for it?
Mr. Chairman. So Working Smart is a class at Buffalo High School. And so you do have to get the principal to write off on it. And you do have to set up, I've got a whole series of papers that I have to sign, have my parents sign. And so I do have friends that do gain experience with other contractors in Buffalo and other kids who do maybe want to pursue being a rancher one day. So I do have kids that do experience stuff from being at the hospital in Buffalo and as well as working in the community.
Well, I'll tell you, if you get any pushback from your superintendent, Senator Wass and I will work him over because we know him pretty well. But go ahead, Senator Wassberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure about that. That's cool. At any rate, Marco, is this a part of your dual enrollment program?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it is. So
Okay. Good job. Keep going.
Yeah, and so I take a lot of dual credits through Buffalo High School, and so this is one of those that I've taken the step forward to try and help me through high school, and so.
Okay, and so, but you said you were taking the courses from, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You said that you were taking courses from Central Wyoming
Mr.
instead
Chairman?
of Northern Wyoming Community College District?
Yes, so I found these classes through CWC in Riverton, and kind of my boss helped me out and he said, you should go check these out. And so I took the opportunity and I have been paying and attending classes online throughout my school year.
Mr. Chairman, one last question. It's a
Yeah,
personal
go ahead.
question. But is your dad Ron and your mom's Angie?
Yes.
They used to work for me at Twin Spruce. Not your mom, but your dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I played football for the Bison, so soft spot for me.
And Mr. Chairman, that's one of the reasons why he has to get back since he
Yeah,
does have a
I-
game tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Who you guys playing?
We've got Jackson tomorrow.
All right.
That might be better.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might add too, one of the nice things about the Working Smart, it's just not in the trades. There are individuals from that course who has gone into the banking industry. They participated
Yeah.
in the medical field. It's been other things, just not within the CTE realm. So it is for other individuals and other students who are interested in pursuing other career paths outside of the construction trade. So it is a complete course outside of just the typical, what people think of just the
Keep
trades.
pushing. We'll make this more the norm than the exception.
Correct. But it is an opportunity. But I do appreciate your guys' latitude and letting Marco go a little earlier, just in case you guys were running out of time and he needed to get back to get back.
Yeah. No, I just moved all the fancy suits to the end of the day just so we could hear from a Wyoming guy. So I appreciate it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So what we really do have here is a bill draft. Brian, you want to knock that out for us? And then we do have Workforce Services here, represented from Department of Education. We'll take some public comment. We're not going to be able to do the whole gambit of apprenticeships and training, OJT. We keep our comments to the bills. Any positive movement, though, we'd be more than happy to hear it. So, Mr. Fuller, you want to help? Oh,
Chairman Greer.
you bet.
Luke Plum, LSO. Just briefly discuss, 23 LSO 142. This is the Apprenticeship and Job Training Promotions in Schools. This bill creates a new duty for the Department of Workforce Services. They're required to provide information to school district boards of trustees on available apprenticeship, student learner agreements, and on-the-job trainings for students for both pay and credit, or both. And that does include information on the rights and responsibilities of school districts, employers, and students under state and federal law, as well as available state and federal financial assistance for placement of students in these various programs. There is a report required by the Department of Workforce Services not later than October 1st of each year to this committee and the Joint Education Committee on the information that they've provided to school districts as required. And along with that, there is a new duty for boards of trustees for school districts. They have to establish guidelines to implement student training and employment programs in the school district using that information from the Department of Workforce Services. And that information must be widely disseminated within their district. There's rulemaking required by the Department of Workforce Services, and that information must be provided to the school districts by the beginning of the 2023-2024 school year, and with the split effective date to allow that to happen.
Okay, thank you. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Representative Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Plum, this is, as I read it, it's written more towards the school districts, but does this apply to community college and the University of Wyoming also?
Chairman and Representative Heitner, as it reads right now, this is to provide it to school districts. I don't believe it would, I don't think we get into community colleges or the University of Wyoming, no.
If you'll recall our discussion, when we were trying to get something to move forward, we were trying to move out of high school and push something forward, rather than wade to the bureaucracy of those other two entities. Yeah, they will. Yeah. Why don't, so let's go ahead, Director, you're here. Let's get your comments from you and your team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Robin Cooley, and I'm the Director of the Wyoming Department of Workforce Services. And it's my privilege to be here today with one of my administrators, Ms. Holly McCamey Simone. She is my administrator of the Workforce Programs Division within our office, which is the division that houses the Business Training and Support Unit, which includes our Apprenticeship Unit. I also wanted to bring our Apprenticeship Unit, which is small but mighty. They're sitting behind us, and that includes Shay Moon, who is our Business Training and Support Unit Program Manager, as well as Ivy Moore over on this side, who is our Apprenticeship Program Lead. Our office has reviewed the draft legislation, and it's fairly easy to implement for us. I think there's no problems with it. We don't have any issues with it, and I think it's something that we can definitely do. We've got programs that we would be more than happy to tout and to talk to both not only work with the Wyoming Department of Education, but also speak with the Board of Trustees, with the school districts about, and work with them to implement in the school districts to the extent that we can. With your permission, if we could, well, let me just start with, in 2019, our agency did apply for and did receive what's called the Apprenticeship Expansion Grant from the U.S. Department of Labor. And it's at that time that we really started to focus on apprenticeships within our office. That's when we were able to develop a unit within our office, and we're able to hire some individuals that were really able to work on this effort. And with your permission, I'd really like to ask Ms. McCamey Simone to provide you with some general information on the opportunities that we've really been able to build out around the state, so that you have an idea of what those apprenticeship opportunities are that we would be able to speak with these school districts about and these Board of Trustees about around the state. So with your permission.
Just want, anybody have any questions for the director? So I want to, this, hate to pass legislation that tells an agency to go do this when you're kind of doing it anyway. So I think if I recall our discussion, and was how do we bring some attention? We've got a lot of work to do in the state in this whole sphere. And I think it's something we've got to put a tremendous amount of focus on. And I think maybe that was sort of the goal here, was to get us rejuvenated, get your department focused in on it again, and then just bring some more attention to it. Not just with your Department of Education and districts around the state. So that, I hope you take it in light of that.
And yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I certainly do. And I just want to also recognize the Department of Education. We've got the Next Gen Sector Partnerships that are out there doing the same thing particularly with the construction industry and a number of healthcare industries, financial industries. They're doing that around the state as well. We've got the WACD, the organization that is around the state, doing the same thing. So I think we've got a number of industries that are coming together that recognize the need for this. This is I don't know if this is the correct word. This is the mantra. This is something that individuals within this area recognize is a need in this state. And so I think there are a lot of industries, a lot of areas that are focusing on it around the state.
Great. Okay, Administrator, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of our apprenticeship programs and some statistics and let you know some things that are on the horizon. The number of apprenticeship programs in Wyoming currently is 88, and we have 396 apprentices in Wyoming. And I think it's important to mention that 43% of that number is youth. So, and that youth is ages 16 to 24. So that does serve that high school population and into college then as well, or into higher ed. We currently have 44 different occupations registered under the Department of Labor. And just to give you an idea of what we're working on and what we have been doing in our school systems, this great team behind me does a lot of high school presentations. They go to and do lunch booths. They participate in those senior nights. They do virtual apprenticeship Q&A events and collaborate with those high school counselors and those academic advisors. And then they've also been participating with Department of Ed, the Career and Tech Education Group, and they've done Workforce Wednesdays where they're on there on a weekly basis and really talking about the opportunities with those students. Our director just mentioned our apprenticeship grant that did sunset recently in June, but that was a 3-year grant, and we served 131 participants, and 42 of those were youth. We also have our workforce development training apprenticeship grant, and that pays for that related instruction and the educational component. So that can be online, that can be at a community college, that can also be in-house if an employer has a trainer that's highly qualified and skilled. We serve 67 apprentices with that training grant and obligated a little over $178,000 since July of this year. I wanted to give you a quick example of a success story that utilized both grants. And we had a youth apprentice in IT in Laramie, and he was in a program there that's IT focused, and he graduated this year as an IT cybersecurity technician. He was 19, and he is the first and youngest to graduate in that program. So that was quite a success. What we're focused on and have been focused on is the apprenticeships in plumbing, electrical, HVAC, and IT. And then we have newly developed apprenticeships, the teacher apprenticeship that we helped support, that WDE led the way on. And then we're also focusing on healthcare. And we have a CNA program that we've stood up. On the horizon, we have a new healthcare apprenticeship for prosthetics, linemen, nursing, geothermal technology, culinary, early childhood, and mining. And so that's just kind of a quick overview. We've got some handouts. We've got our experts behind us. If you have questions, we're happy to bring them up as well.
Nope, I think we'll keep moving through some stuff. But Senator Wassenberger and I will have a question on your apprenticeship program with an idea I have.
Okay,
So,
wonderful.
okay.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
It's going to require him, so.
Thank you.
Okay, so we had Department of Education, and you want to come up, introduce yourself? Thank you, Director, Administrator, appreciate it.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
My name is Wanda Maloney, and I am the Chief Policy Officer at the
Yeah, Mr.
Wyoming
Chairman.
Department of
there we go.
Education.
Thank you. I've been struggling all morning. I thought it was just me.
I appreciate that also. Thank you. Next to me is Dr. Michelle Aldrich, and she supports our department as the Career and Technical Education Team Supervisor. We wanted to provide you with really 3 points this morning. The first one is around the data that we collect at the Department of Education from school districts. The second would be around some of the professional development and the information that we disseminate. And then thirdly, just the opportunities and the stakeholders that we meet with regarding this work. So the first thing I will share with you is just the information that we collect at the department. And what we look at is any student that is a concentrator, that would mean any course that they took in a sequence of 2 related to career and technical education. And then we also look at work-based learning opportunities that students take. We collect that information. And then finally, we look at any credentials. So if a student does collect or take an exam that would make them industry certified, there are those 2 requirements, the 2 courses that they take, and then the industry certification. That's what we call a student is post-secondary ready or career ready. So when we think about educating our students and moving them on out into the workforce, we give them options. They can be either career ready, military ready, or college ready. And so that option covers the career ready portion of it. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Aldridge, and she can tell you more about some of the professional development that we offer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Greer and members of the committee, we really appreciate this opportunity to visit with you about work-based learning and these opportunities. This bill is a great starting point for something that we've been working on the entire 4 years that I've been at the department. And a lot of times thanks to the impetus of Representative Greer. I have some concerns. We have been doing a lot of work-based, a lot of professional development around these topics. We've been laying the groundwork for this. When I first came into this position, there have been endorsements in the past that teachers could earn and have attached to their license where they could oversee work-based learning, or sometimes as it was called, work co-op learning back in the 80s and 90s. However, in the early 90s, the University of Wyoming quit offering the 3 courses that were required to receive that endorsement. So as you can imagine, by 2020, 2021, 22, many of those teachers who earned that industry or that endorsement to their teaching license have since retired. And we really had, what was really going on was the wild, wild west out there. We had teachers who did not have any endorsement that were awarding work-study credit outside of their content area. We had secretaries who were accepting pay stubs in exchange for credit for students working. And so we worked really a lot this last year with the Professional Teaching Standards Board to come up with 12 competencies that would lead to an endorsement in what's called Work-Based Learning Coordinator. Governor Gordon signed that into policy on May 4th of this year. We've been working on training teachers and individuals around the state that have a PIC permit in order to teach career and technical education to be able to award work-study credit, making sure that there's some sort of a learning component to go with that work-based learning information. We also have done, as Director Cooley alluded to, workshops called Workforce Wednesdays with our colleagues from the Department of Workforce Services. We've had numerous one-on-one meetings over the last 4 years. Each year we meet with every district one-on-one. We talk about the student learner agreement that was brought forth. I will tell you that I just visited with a colleague at Department of Workforce Services this morning to find out how many student learner agreements and how many districts have utilized that opportunity, and was told that since its inception, there's been 1 district and 1 student that has actually filed that form, even though we've talked to all 48 districts about that. I believe that, as you heard from Marcos this morning, there might be a misconception that he was involved in that student learner agreement situation, and his opportunity actually happened outside of the student learner agreement. There's a lot of work-based learning going on around the state that where that opportunity or that resource isn't being fully utilized. We also,
I'm sorry, I actually have two people on a learner agreement working for me right now. So I wonder, something's getting crossed somewhere. Was Waukee 1 the only district?
this was according to Ricardo in Workforce Services this morning.
Of course, we might not be using the state's form. We're using, of course, the state's form is my form, but the form I created. But yeah, we just may need to follow up on that.
I also wanted to make a note that we would love the opportunity to work with the writers of this draft to make sure that the definitions and the wording, it matches up with what we have to do for federal reporting. For instance, in 2021, 2022, districts reported 0 students in apprenticeships. And in 2020, 2021, there were 53. So it would be really helpful if we could align our definitions with for this bill with the Department of Workforce Services so that we can actually get you accurate numbers and districts know what they need to be reporting. That would be really helpful as well. I think probably most of you know that youth employment is at an all-time low historically, nationally, for a variety of reasons. And that was even declining since it was declining prior to COVID. Our goal is that every student would have an opportunity to have a work-based learning experience before they graduate. The State Board of Education has been doing a lot of work around profiles of a graduate, and that's one of the things that they've been hearing from employers and business and industry and stakeholders about the need for students to have work experience opportunities. So while this is a great start, I think that this would give a lot of direction and guidance to local districts. I think that there are some opportunities where we can increase its effectiveness.
What committee, any questions? Yeah, go ahead. We'll go with Representative Heiner, then Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Aldrich, I appreciate your efforts and the success you're having with this program. We as a legislature, we love to pass laws. We go home at the end of the day and pat ourselves on the back if we pass laws. But as I read over this and as I hear your testimony, you're already doing many of these things for learner students and for apprenticeships. Will this bill, as we've drafted, actually help you, or is it just something for us to pat ourselves on the back?
I think I will tell you that we do have, out of the 48 districts, I am only aware of one who does not allow any credit for work-based learning opportunities. And the concern that that district has is that it will impact their elective FTEs for teachers who teach electives. And work-based learning a lot of times in a district is given elective credit. And so I think it's a great starting point. I think it definitely renews the conversation. It gives impetus to districts to be able to get this and requires them to get that information out. I think that, getting it to school counselors and specifying school counselors might be better than just saying to disseminate it and amongst the district, as is in line 22 of under section A, where it says widely disseminated within the district. I think that leaves a lot of opportunities just to hang posters in the hallways and hope that kids are going to get it through osmosis. But I think that it's a great starting point, and I think that it would really direct districts that they need to have a policy in place. And it really, quite honestly, Representative Heiner, becomes an equity issue. When we have some districts where students are allowed to earn up to 3 elective credits for towards graduation through work experience, and we have some districts who allow nothing.
Yep, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the bill draft, and maybe I should direct this to the Department of Workforce Services, what's the definition of a registered apprenticeship program? Is there a repository? Who's registering it and where?
Do you want to answer for me?
Yeah, go, Director or Administrator, whoever wants to answer that. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Gray, a registered apprenticeship is one registered and approved through the Department of Labor. those are the registered apprenticeships that we deal with and that we work with.
I have a couple follow-ups, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you're the Federal Department of Labor you're talking about,
Correct.
and then how many are there? I mean, are they registered for, how many are there, right?
I'm sorry, I don't have that.
We have 44 different occupations.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, 44 different occupations.
Mr. Chairman, a couple more follow-ups. What's the definition of a student learner agreement and how many are there? Sorry, I'm trying to learn more about this. I mean,
Sure.
I understand it from 30,000 feet up, but like I don't understand how this works on the
Sure.
ground as much.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, the student learner agreement was new legislation passed in 2021 where because of Department of Labor legislation or rules, there were 17 different classifications that individuals had to be 18 or over in order to work in those different industries. By enacting student learner legislation, 7 of those different industries, then if you were signed a student learner agreement, 7 of those industries, those individuals could work in. So the student learner agreement is something that allows workers' compensation coverage for those individuals in those different industries, in those 7 industries. And the student learner agreement is actually something that's signed between the employer and the school district. And then it's submitted to workers' compensation, so there's coverage for that individual employee, for the student. That's really all it is it's a coverage, a liability issue.
So Representative Gray, for example, if you wanted to bring in a high school student and have them work in your fabrication shop or weld, the OSHA regulations would prohibit, interestingly enough, they can weld, but they can't use a hand grinder. Well, if you want to make a welder mad, let's let somebody weld and not have to grind their own work. So part of how this came in is in the OSHA rules itself is if you have, and it was dubbed, the language was student learner agreement with the school district in place with the employer, that student could work with and train with a mentor within your shop. And that was just a reason to get that codified and then out there. So industry, and more particular school districts, were afraid of the liability issue. So that's, and we run that, I don't think you were on the committee when we ran that through 3 years ago or something like that.
One more follow-up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, remembering the 2021 bill and that workers' comp issue, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, and it's, I like this bill. I like having the statute books clear on the duties of agencies. And I think the agencies take what the statute books say very seriously. So I think it's always good to be updating that. I actually think one of the agencies that needs some work is Wyoming Business Council, and I wish we could have gotten a little more movement on that over the last couple of years on their statutes. But anyway, what I'm think is missing a little in this bill is linking, and I know the first paragraph mentions this, but school credit to the registered apprenticeship programs and the student learner agreement. So I guess my question is, how often are those two not linked to course credit? Because I think that's always very important in getting buy-in on the districts, not just them advertising a potential apprenticeship, but linking it to some kind of on-the-ground course, something that's happening on the ground. That's when I think it really advances a little bit. How often is that not there? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. I will tell you that because there are a lot of different types of work-based learning, and because Workforce Services and the Department of Education don't necessarily use the same definitions or the same terminology, it is a moving target. I will tell you that districts in 2020, 2021 reported that 1,039 students were involved in work-based learning. In 21, 22, 707 students were involved in work-based learning. And then it also breaks it out. In addition to that, they report out apprenticeships, internships, cooperative education, and school-based enterprises, along with other. So it's difficult to know from the district or the state level how many of those students in each district are receiving credit.
Okay. Yep, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there any ideas from the individuals testifying on how we could incentivize workforce services to incentivize districts to include course credit? Because I think in this bill, because I think that's really important. Thank you.
Do you have ideas, Robin?
I would prefer it's not just, putting more money out there, like things other than money.
I will respond that we have incentivized districts through the use of accountability model and making sure that work-based learning counts towards the accountability model for career readiness. We do have, through the Wyoming Department of Education, ways to incentivize districts with levers for funding. And without putting out additional funding, there are things that we can implement through, for instance, our Perkins 5-state plan that creates a lever for making sure that happens.
Director, did you want to comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I'm going to have to think on that. For us to have incentives for school districts, it might be something we can come up with. I'd need to think about that. I think our incentives right now are the money behind it. We have, for instance, internships that we are able to provide funding for. We have an ARPA proposal in right now that's going through the vetting process for pre-apprenticeships. That would lead, the pre-apprenticeships then would lead into the apprenticeship. And like the young man that visited with us this morning, that would help him walk through those different processes and then lead him right into that apprenticeship right out of college. So we've got some different options in the works, but I don't know that we would have any way to incentivize a school district, but we can think on it. It certainly will.
So I don't want to speak for Representative Gray, but this has been a conversation that we've had again and again. And really, industry is not even looking for the incentives. It helps, and they'll take advantage of that. What we're all looking for is one, for the districts to be motivated to participate in these programs, motivated to get these kids that want to do something differently. So that's the incentive, is not to jeopardize their funding model because they're doing it. The next thing is just what is the clear path forward? And I think the frustration with this whole universe of issues and why this bill comes up is says, hey, do this and let's talk about it and let's start talking together and communicate it, is all this bill is doing. But quite frankly, it isn't more money. It's just get the path laid out. What holes do we have to step in?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, one more thing, if I may. The bigger incentive, if we can look at this as a broad stroke and a future incentive for Wyoming, what this does potentially is provide the pathway for our young people to stay in Wyoming, because it provides them the avenue into a job, a good paying job in Wyoming, so they're not going to leave. And that I think all of us can agree is a very valuable incentive.
Yes, agree. The number one incentive.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Representative Sherwood, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question to follow up on Representative Gray's point about tracking which districts are offering course credit. Is that something that could be added to the Wyoming Department of Education's? You talked about the data that you collect. Could that just be a question that is expanded as you're gathering this information from the school districts? under the Wyoming Accountability and Education Act? Thank you.
Yes, and we actually probably already have that data of which districts offer these opportunities based on who's reported that they've had any students participate.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a great concept, a great idea, something that we need to promote. But I am concerned that this does impose another mandate on local school boards. And we continually do that. Can this be implemented without a lot of work on their part? Or how much impact do you think it'll have on local school boards? Because they shall do some things.
So Chairman Greer, through you to Representative Iyer. Yes, this does put the impetus on the school district and the school board to get that information disseminated amongst their district. Again, I think that we could probably help to provide some ideas on individuals to get that information to that would be key, such as school counselors that are doing the students' schedules. I think the bigger picture is that by gathering that, having workforce services gather that information, it's going to be consistent, it's going to be complete, and it's going to be accurate, which I think when we leave districts to themselves to go out and gather that information, it takes a lot more time and it may not be as effective or as complete. And so by having one document that's provided to the district by workforce services each year before October 1st, I believe the bill says, we can assure that students across the state are getting the same information, and we would hope it would be consistent information, but hopefully they would be getting it through a consistent means. So I think it may actually reduce some of the work on a school board versus just saying that they have to do it. It gives an agency, thank you, Workforce Services, the task of gathering that information and disseminating it. And I have to say, we work extremely well with Department of Workforce Services, so I think that anything that they would disseminate, we would also make sure we got out through our means of distribution.
Okay. All right. Any further questions? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Okay. Do we have public testimony on this? Yep. Come on up, Ms. Delancey.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey. I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance, and it's so nice to be back in front of you. I always enjoy being with this committee, and especially as our chairman winds down his tenure. We hate to see him go, and again, just want to thank you for your work and your service and your leadership. You've had an exceptional impact on our state. And this topic is really one of those examples of the work of your chairman. And as well as others. But I know this committee hears so many important issues to our state, listening to the discussion this morning. And this one seems to be coming back all the time. This one, in the scale of importance, for some of the reasons that were just articulated by our agency leaders and Department of Education, should remain a focus and topic of the work of this committee, even as our chairman is no longer in that seat to guide these discussions. Chairman Greer has worked on these issues for years. They keep coming back. And I think that Representative Gray really highlighted some of the complexities. The questions that Representative Gray was just asking, those are the questions that are asked daily by members of the business community, the education community, the workforce, students. People want to find a path forward. And that's, really where your chairman's comments as far as this bill helps us get that path. We need that path. We have everybody kind of disconnected, no matter how hard it feels like people are trying. And I want to give exceptional credit and shout out to the people that have been committed to working on improving that path and carving that path. Director Cooley and her team, excellent. Department of Education, with Dr. Aldridge leading the path, excellent. Katie Legursky and her organization of contractors, excellent. It's not for lack of trying. We're all trying really, really, really hard to figure out what that path is. I think that also Representative Ayer, brought out the 800-pound gorilla in the room. We're in this place where who wants to tell whom what to do? But we keep coming back to that, this committee, and from a policy standpoint, it sounds to me like the legislature is wanting more. And I just want to draw you back to the comments from Dr. Aldrich. This is an equity issue. Every child in this state should have the opportunity to get credit for work-based learning, regardless of the impact to other, curriculum in the district. Like that should not be the driving force behind how our districts are making decisions. We should be student-focused and working on developing our workforce so Wyoming can remain a leader in the nation and in the region to be able to employ and keep our children here for future generations. So if this, bill is what it takes to kind of define roles and responsibilities, that's really what the legislature is good at. Setting those expectations, identifying who is to do what in what regard. And I think that this is a great starting point. I know that there's a lot more work to be done, but if this is what it takes to help us get that path, my members really want to see that level of clarity and accountability and responsibility for all parties in this conversation, not just the state agencies or the districts or the department. Everybody equally shares the role, the lift here to really get us across the finish line. And I just, again, want to highlight to you on page 3, line 22, I agree completely with the testimony that you just heard from Dr. Aldrich about using words, language of widely disseminated within the district. I would ask that as this committee works this bill, that we have a little bit more prescriptive of what that really means. Does that mean just buried on a website somewhere? Or does that mean, paper in hand of a school counselor or a CTE educator? You're like getting that information actually in the hands of the people who are best equipped within that structure of district to actually do something with the information to help eliminate that disconnect of, as Representative Heiner said, patting ourselves on the back thinking that we're doing a good thing when in the end, maybe we're not quite getting to the heart of the matter. So I know this is a great launching point. I hope that this committee continues to elevate the importance of this topic the way that Chairman Greer has. And again, the members of the Wyoming Business Alliance stand as ready and willing partners to be able to help in the conversation to help nail down that path, to get that path correct. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to address any questions. And once again, thank you for your continued work and effort on this topic.
Committee, any questions? I know I'm passionate about it because when we run into roadblocks or excuses, I get angry. So that's a good sign of it. So yeah, good. Thank you for your.
Great. One final comment. I just want to remind you all that the Governor's Business Forum is coming up November 15th through the 17th in Laramie. One of your colleagues is going to be a speaker. We're so excited to have her. I hope you all can join us and look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
Promotional spots cost a box of donuts, all right?
Got that in there, Cindy. Good job.
Any other public comment? Please come forward. Yep.
There we go. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Brenda Morgan. I am the training director for this Wyoming statewide electrical apprenticeship program based in Casper. I just want to share with Representative Gray, I was thrilled when I saw this bill. Our apprenticeship program has actually been a registered apprenticeship program with the Department of Labor in Wyoming since 1965. When I started working for the apprenticeship, I may have shared this with you previously, I was shocked to find out that this apprenticeship had been in the state. I was like, why didn't I know about it in high school? So I'm very passionate about sharing with students, not just about our apprenticeship program, but about apprenticeship in general throughout the state. I have passion, will travel. Was in Cheyenne yesterday and the day before for the Classroom to Careers conference, which was so amazing. It had industry, it had post-secondary, K through 12 people there, as well as individuals like myself in training, talking about career readiness for our students. So passionate about this and so thrilled to see that this discussion is happening about apprenticeships. So I think this is a wonderful start. I do agree that we do need to make it a little bit more specific how this is disseminated through the schools. I can tell you I have been visiting more Cheyenne schools than I have Casper, even though I am based in Casper, because getting in the door sometimes is a little difficult. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity to start that discussion. Just a quick note, National Apprenticeship Week, Department of of Labor is recognizing apprenticeship for 85 years. Ours, of course, has been here since 1965. So I encourage you to check out your local apprenticeships in your back door. We are here in Casper during the week. It's November 14th through the 20th. We are actually having an open house at our apprenticeship. So any students that want to stop by and visit, or any representatives that would like to visit our campus, you're more than welcome to do that. But again, thank you. Just thank you. I think you deserve to pat yourself on the back for this. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
Any
Yeah.
questions?
Representative Bear.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Morgan,
Yes.
I appreciate your passion about this subject. And I was just curious if you had any ideas about how we could be more clear and more specific about widely disseminating this information since you've been in the schools and
You
doing
know,
it yourself.
for our program, we currently have 98 apprentices. So we are, if not the largest registered apprenticeship in the state. Word of mouth. Word of mouth is the #1 recruitment tool for our program. If not former electricians, family, friends. I was actually visiting with the young gentleman who was speaking to you, to his dad out in the lobby about the program. He had never heard about our program. So speaking to kids one-on-one, first of all, is probably the #1 recruitment tool. Other than that, you know, showing them, giving them examples, showing them what it can do for you. My husband went through the program 27 years ago. He is still an electrician in the state. My stepson is going through the program. He'll graduate in May. It's a viable option to stay in the state, even possibly start your own business. So apprenticeship opens so many doors. So, but yeah, word of mouth, talking to the students.
Yeah, Representative.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My experience on word of mouth usually works best when there's excellence that everybody wants to share.
Yes.
So what are the types of things that we could celebrate as far as what's working in this program and what has been excellent in the past?
Sure. You know, our program has existed since 1965. We have broke out essentially over 1,000 electricians. Some have stayed in the state. Some have started their own companies. Our graduates pass the state of Wyoming's journeyman exam. The pass rate's about 99 to 98% the first time. We train qualified electricians. Our program specifically is an inside wireman program. So we do construction, we do commercial, industrial, and residential electrical work. So we have the best trained electricians. We are, and you know, I promote our industry. I'm not an electrician by trade, but I also serve on the Workforce Development Council. Apprenticeship is just a great way, particularly for Wyoming kids, to get to work quickly. I was the oldest with 7. If I'd have known about this, I probably got to work a little bit quicker, got paid while I do it. Our apprentices start out at, you know, around $15, $16 an hour. They get health insurance. They're already providing back into the economy of Wyoming just by going through a trained program. So yes, apprenticeship is vital.
Okay, all right, well, thank you. We appreciate your comments.
Yes.
Anyone else wishes to comment on this topic? Yep, please come up and introduce yourself.
I can't.
Is it on? Here, I'll get it up here. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Riata Little Walker. I am the apprenticeship coordinator for Wyoming Rural Waters Apprenticeship Program. We just kicked it off 2 years ago, so we'll be graduating our first apprentice here very soon. So Wyoming Rural Water, of course, all communities, large and small, we have 2 occupations within our program, one for water treatment operators and one for wastewater. The water industry in general, we do 2 very important things. We provide clean, safe drinking water, and we protect source water. Those are vitally important. A lot of the legislation that you guys see involve those 2 topics. And so for professionals in the water industry, they have to be skilled in a lot of different things, right? They have to be very good with chemistry and math and heavy equipment operation and construction skills, cybersecurity and technology, that's huge, emergency response. So apprenticeship is a perfect model for our industry, and a lot of the skills are transferable with a lot of the other apprenticeship programs in the state. And a lot of those skills can be started, if not given a credential at the high school level, and setting them up to go into an apprenticeship program after high school. And it is a higher education model, just like college. So getting more awareness out about not only what programs exist in the state, but also the opportunities to get into a career in an industry without getting a degree. You can always go back and get a degree later if you want to do that. For example, water industry, hydrologists, engineers, there's a lot of college degrees in there as well. So I pitch that this is a way to get into the industry, start earning some money, get some credentials behind you as you're figuring out what your career path is. Obviously, we intend that they stay in the water industry, but. And then nationally, I want to point out that the water industry is facing a third of its workforce retiring within the next 10 years. So it's a serious workforce shortage issue, along with many of the other industries that are back here. So I don't have all the solutions. That's not my job, but I'm here to support you in whatever way I can and work through getting to the bottom of this.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate your comments, your support.
Thank you.
Anyone else who wishes to testify on this? Okay, we'll go ahead and close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? We're talking about 23 LSO 142.
Move, Bill.
Okay, moved by Burkhart, seconded by Sherwood. Okay, so committee, just go ahead and we'll just work through this. Anything on page 1 for comment? Okay, page 2. Page 3, does anyone want to take a shot? Yeah, go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to propose an amendment on page 3, line 20, after district, add and to link those programs to course credit.
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
After page 3, line 20, the amendment would add after the word district and to link those programs to course credit.
Is there a second? Second. Okay, seconded by Heiner. Discussion? Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Is that the correct, what we want to say, to course credit? Or is it some other credit? The student needs to get credit for that in every district, but is it course credit is what we want to call that?
School credit on page 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
School credit or something
It's called
like that.
school credit. Was that friendly amendment? Very good. Okay. So I think this is a good amendment, and then herein runs into the problem I've had over the years. You have Minerals Committee, right? Economic Development, Business, we drive this. And then I run into the Education Committee where we've got all these terms and all of these reports and all these credentialings, and and we get bogged down. So we can use the term school credit if this comes out of this committee as it works to the legislature. We can tighten up some definitions and get up to some key legislators, and we got lots of time to work this during the session. So, okay, we understand the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That amendment's adopted. Okay, anything further on that page? Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would propose an amendment on line 18 after the statute quote to add shall within 60 days. And that's part of the amendment. And then on line 21, and I'll just do this all at once. On line 21, at the end of the sentence, change it to read shall be given annually to each high school student. And then on line 22, delete widely disseminated. And if you want, I can read that.
I've got it.
Okay.
Question is, does Heather have it?
Okay, seconded by Sherwood. Did you get that, Brian? Or who's Plum doing it?
Luke?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so it would read to provide under 922602B9 shall within, and I would if amenable, shall within 60 days after July 1, 2023, establish guidelines, and then move to line 22. Information on apprenticeships, student learners, and training opportunities shall be given annually to each high school student in the district.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. That's what I had written down. So, okay. I'll just comment that, you know, we can get this amendment in there, but this may be something to think about as you move through session to beef this up a little bit. Because if you don't get it to the counselors, then it ain't gonna work. So, but okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Amendment's passed, Brian.
Yep, and Mr. Chairman, I assume we can make conforming changes on page 4. Right now, the bill draft says that the information shall be provided beginning with the 23-24 school year. I assume that would be this school year.
You assume correctly, Brian. Anything further? Yeah, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is linked to the First Amendment adopted. On page 3, line 9, after the conclusion of the sentence, I'd like to add a sentence. The amendment would add the sentence, "The report shall include information on the implementation of guidelines linking these programs to school credit."
Okay, so reporting requirement. Okay, everybody understand the amendment? Hear it? Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Burkhardt. Any discussion? All, excuse me, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Amendment's adopted. Anything further, committee? Okay, so the motion before the committee is to move this forward as a committee bill to the next session. Roll call vote being necessary.
This is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 140 and job training promotion in schools as amended. Senator Beitman? Senator Cooper?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss? Senator Wasserberger?
Aye.
Representative Baer?
Aye.
Representative Burkhart?
Aye.
Representative Duncan excused. Representative Ayer?
Aye.
Representative Gray?
Aye.
Representative Heiner?
Aye.
Representative Sherwood?
Aye.
Representative Western? Co-Chairman Anderson?
Aye.
Chairman Greer?
Aye.
That passed.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll let the new chairman decide if that's a House or Senate bill, as they have in the past. Okay, so real quick, before we break for lunch, committee, Chairman Anderson and Brian, we may need your assistance. We're looking at our agenda, and because they are all appearing by Zoom, Chairman Anderson was wondering if we could move the aeronautics report to tomorrow at the bottom of the agenda to help speed us up so we can talk about deregulated powered zones even longer today. Can you get
We can check with them over lunch.
Okay, if you get in contact with them, I see we have we'll try to communicate with the folks out there. So we'll come back with our report from Sinclair right after lunch. We'll adjourn for lunch till 1:30. And so the last two topics I very much enjoyed, committee. So we are recessed till 1:30. Thank you.